do the gag again.
Oh, are you,
hang on.
are you all right there, Jack?
Yeah. Sorry, I was actually distracted from the bit there because I heard myself twice.
Oh, okay.
Let's just end this. Let's just start Let's just do the thing. Let's go.
Okay, cool.
Hello.
So we've got quite a few viewers, which is nice. I'm sure more will show up as we speak onwards. So we're here to talk about cancel culture. For anyone that doesn't know, I tend to just have one overarching topic that's broad, so the conversation can branch off in different directions. You know, we'll keep it light and breezy, and it can go wherever we want it to go. It can be as spicy as we want or as chill as we want. You know, whatever happens, really. What we're going to do initially is I'm just going to go around to each person as they sort of appear here on my screen. I want just each person to give like an introduction, like 10 seconds of who they are, where you can find the content that they do. And secondly, just a brief description of your thoughts on cancel culture. And that can be anything up to like 2 minutes, okay? So just a brief description, and we'll go from there. So Mabase, I can't see your face, but I assume you're there. If you want to give us an introduction and your thoughts on cancel culture.
No, wait, my camera's not working?
No.
I appear to be frozen too.
Oh yeah, you're frozen, Cara. It's okay. Look, technical difficulties are expected from my viewers, so it's fine. But just go ahead and give your introduction, and then what you think of cancel culture, your thoughts on it, and then just fix your camera whilst I'm going through everyone else. Okay?
Yep, sure. Okay, I'm Mabase. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Mabase. And you can also find me on YouTube.com. I think it's also /Mabase. I'm not sure. I think I changed that. I think so. Pretty sure we did.
Okay.
We did. Anyway, so my position on cancel culture is, I guess I'm a part of the I don't know, I guess the cool kids squad, right? That's I guess been running around Twitter now. The Justin J school of thought, which is like, this isn't a thing. Like, people don't actually get canceled. No one, like, most people who people say are canceled always come out the other side sometimes better than ever. Like they're like, people are like, essentially celebrities are like Saiyans from Dragon Ball Z. You beat the shadow, they almost die, they almost go into obscurity, and then they come back with the biggest fucking Kamehameha you ever fucking seen. And I'm like, okay, dude, this isn't a thing. People aren't canceled. That's not real.
Okay, that's cool. I'll move on. I'll just say as well, there might be some disagreement within this, and that's fine. But if we just save any conversation about it and responding to people's points of view after everyone's given their like initial thoughts, okay, we'll go from there. So, right, Zanzi, you're next. Introduction, cancel culture thoughts.
Hey, I'm Zanzi, Irish Republican Socialist. You can find me on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter. I basically just stream. Cancel culture itself. It's a thing, but the way people talk about it, it might as well not be. It's a very generic term. I describe it as an umbrella term that kind of collectively scoops up a lot of very real systemic institutional issues, and we tend to focus it through an individualist lens. It's a very real thing, but it's only when you actually like break it down and look at the individual pieces you can really start to look at it. If you ignore that, it functionally doesn't mean anything.
Okay, no problem. Noopy, I'll let you just introduce yourself as the moderator and whatnot, and if you've got any thoughts, give them. If not, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are mostly in line with Zanzi, so I won't really elaborate too much on it. I'm Noopy, also known as Noopy Tunes. I make political, progressive, leftist comics on mostly Twitter. Just Google Noopy Tunes, you can find me. NOOPYTOONS. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Catherine?
Yeah, I am a Twitch streamer. I do a panel on Saturdays called Goth Girl Talk, where we talk random things. I go on all kinds of other people's panels in the Twitch political space, and I'm currently calling myself a classical libertarian because I like to change up these labels that I use for myself. As long as they're still accurate, I think it's useful to change them. I actually wrote a very short opening statement. Cancel culture, air quotes, is a buzzword for a grab bag of vaguely related concepts. And if you use the term without clearly arguing against it, I think you're contributing to the death of nuance and furthering the intentionally ambiguous narratives of bad faith actors. It's a term we should not use if we are serious about conversation.
Okay, Kara?
All right. So I'm Kara. I run a channel called Transnational. I do YouTube videos and sometimes Twitch. More or less, I prepared a little statement that I'm going to read. It should take me about 2 minutes. I want to start off by thanking ChudLogic for having me on despite such short notice. I saw the topic in the lineup and I was incredibly interested in being part of this discussion. When I was a teenager, I converted to the truth, as Jehovah's Witnesses like to call it, which in hindsight was primarily a move to satisfy my father. I was baptized 9 years ago in the city in which I currently live, having moved here very recently. 3 years after that, I was disfellowshipped. For those unacquainted with what that is, it's essentially excommunication, but for Jehovah's Witnesses. For all intents and purposes, I was canceled by my religion and those who practice, the goal of which was to shame me and remove me from my social circle in an attempt to enforce doctrinal compliance. And while I am obviously no longer, nor have I decided to return to the religion, to the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses, it is safe to say that I was profoundly affected by this event in my life. I've also experienced multiple accounts of similar rejection and shunning on my mother's side, though all shorter lasting. I still do not have a relationship with my father due to being disfellowshipped. I say all of this because I found myself on the receiving end of a type of cancel culture, and I feel it gives me some insight on what it feels like to be the canceled. I'll first start by saying that I think this term is a misnomer, and in and of itself is a very inaccurate term to use for this phenomenon. Fundamentally, I feel that cancel culture refers to a social mechanism that seeks to create a competitive framework with which people can feel validated in their progressive identity. I also run a Facebook group with my best friend that is for fiction writers who seek to write accurate depictions of minority representation. Within that group, on multiple occasions, I've seen people engage in what I can only describe as I stated above. And I've seen people be at each other's throats for mishandling certain circumstances, and usually it revolves around a person speaking or acting from a place of privilege, and someone else making a series of assumptions in order to dunk on the person in question. I think that cancellation is a manifestation of the competitive mode within social circles in order for us to create hierarchies of progressivism that serve to validate identities of the canceller. I do not think that an individual who cancels someone has any real power to cause harm on their own, but when wielded as a collective, just as within my previous religion, can be a highly dangerous force that should not be used lightly, and even less should be turned on minorities, even if those minorities appear to have engaged in some questionable acts. Bar any substantial harm, such as but not limited to rape or the leveraging of institutional power for personal gain, I think it is imperative that people refrain from issuing judgment on others, and instead focus inward on themselves. There is no need to compete, for it is only together that we have a chance of societal change. To add a little bit further regarding what everyone else said about whether or not it should be used, I think that overall people should stop using the term cancel culture, or try and co-opt it back from the right, mainly because the right has seemed to really glom onto the idea.
Okay, brilliant. And next, Peter, introduction and your thoughts.
Well, hi, my name is Peter Coffin. I am a YouTuber. I do video essays primarily. I just released one entitled Cancel Culture several hours ago. It is on the subject clearly. I would say right off that I agree with a lot of the people who are saying that it is a misnomer. I think that it's not a very precise term in any way. I do think it is a bit unfortunate that it is the term specifically that has been ascribed to this, so to speak, but it kind of has been, and that's why we're kind of stuck with it, I think. As far as what it actually is, I think it is a sort of market logic as applied to everyday or social network oriented interaction, and I think that it can end up a lot of what Kara said is very much in line with what I think on this. I think that it does manifest from a competitive mindset. I think there's also an element of people who actually really are pursuing justice, really are attempting to find like a way to correct wrongs that were actually real that happened. But I also think there's a lot of it that is about perception. I also think there's a lot of it that is about, again, competition. Again, a lot of what Kara said is in line with what I think on the subject, and I very much am in the same camp as you, Kara.
Cool.
Okay, brilliant. Right, and finally, Jack, introduction and your thoughts.
Hello, I'm Jack Sane. I'm a YouTuber. Chud finally got desperate to invite the Disney movie's a fascist guy onto a stream. Yeah, my thoughts are very much in line with what everyone else has said. I think that cancel culture has kind of become this all-encompassing term for a variety of different phenomena. And I think it's really important, especially as it's been oddly prescribed to the left, despite representing behaviors that many different groups engage in. Important as a thing to break down and kind of disseminate into what exactly we're talking about on each case, I guess. Also, apologies in advance if a lot of what I say is very incoherent. I usually script all of my content, so
yeah, that's the
Thank
thing.
you.
When you video essayists get on a live stream, you see how tough it is to like be off the cuff all the time, right?
Well, I am tired. So.
No, that's cool. Look, it sounds like
Notepad.
oh wow, notepad as well. Jesus. I mean, it sounds like there's kind of broad agreement in some areas. What I'm interested in discussing then, because it sounds like we agree that like it's not the best term for it, right? Like no one's ever like Thanos snapped out of existence, truly. What I think there's disagreement on like is whether we should even use the term at all or not. So first of all, I'm interested in digging down into that. So I'll throw it over to you first of all, Catherine, because I think you kind of most strongly said you kind of think it's a really bad idea to use the term. Can you maybe just elaborate on that, and then we'll get into a conversation?
Sure. I don't know if I'll be elaborating or just sort of restating what I was saying, but I'll do one or the other. When it comes to these buzzwords, and especially buzzwords that are co-opted by the right, I think just using them and like normalizing the idea that the word, so in this case, cancel culture, is a real thing that people talk about and exists is extremely harmful, and it plays literally into the like handbook of the alt-right and various like faith actors, whatever their denomination is. And so like Peter, your video that you just put out, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I got at least halfway through, and I would say that if I was making that same video, I would have come out a lot harder pointing out that while I'm talking about cancel culture, it's something I think doesn't exist in the way people think it does exist.
Well, I actually think that the thing that I don't necessarily think that it exists the way people think it exists, but I think that's almost most things in the world. I think a lot of people are sort of looking at things from a very individualist perspective, and what I attempted to do was take the sort of underlying history of what some people have ascribed to it. I also think it's kind of unfortunate, again, that's the word, but I do think that we should use the word, because if we use a different word, then ultimately what we're basically doing is making the argument about what word it is, and the people already use a certain word. The president used it. It's basically canon, unfortunately. I think that it's important to maybe elucidate why it's not necessarily a culture unto itself. I think that that's kind of part of the biggest problem of it, the idea that this is some sort of like secret culture that exists somewhere behind a wall or something like that. That's my problem personally with the term. It's not the word cancel, though. I think that canceling is a matter of institutional power. I think somebody who doesn't have institutional power can be very easily barked out of a space, very easily pushed to a place where they might do things that are harmful to themselves. And again, with people who do have some sort of institutional power connection, they are basically untouchable, unless, of course, for whatever reason, that institution decides that they no longer want anything to do with them. Again, I think it's the problem is I think that it's not a culture. I think that it is, in fact, a manifestation of the sort of market ideology we're indoctrinated in our lives.
So I see where I need to like sort of clarify based on your response, which is like a lot of people call cancel culture an umbrella term, and my issue is that there is no such thing as this category or this like umbrella cancel culture, right? The things that people put inside of this category are just random disparate things that are in their minds somehow vaguely related, and ever using this term actually to actually discuss issues is going to it's like a form of disinformation itself, because
I outwardly disagree with that.
Because, well, sure, but like if you use it, then you are saying yes, the things inside this group are indeed linked and similar to each other.
I think they are, though.
Right. So do you agree that like when a right winger uses the term cancel culture, the things they're talking about, like someone getting like fired from their job for being racist at work, like would you say that's a form of cancel culture?
I mean, you could probably say that it is. I don't necessarily think that that's
right.
Being racist at
Wait,
work.
wait. Let Pete
respond. However, and then being racist at work is different than being racist on social media. Being racist at work is to directly violate the workplace like behaviors that one might expect, and they usually have signed some sort of agreement at this point that you won't engage in those types of behaviors. So I don't know that I would consider that cancel culture. No. However, there are people who say something inappropriate on Twitter or on Facebook or something and get fired for that. I would have to say that that is cancel culture, because it's not them at work. It's not them directly harassing anyone at work or impeding anyone else's work. I think that it may not necessarily be good on their part, but I do think that the mechanisms that one would use in order to enforce like some sort of a quote unquote accountability for saying that type of stuff on a social platform is in fact the same mechanism that is being referred to as quote unquote cancel culture.
So do you not see where it would be so much more useful to bring nuance in by saying that when someone gets fired for something they've said on social media, this is an issue with like with workplaces making you accountable for things outside of being at work, compared to another issue, which is people being fired for legitimate causes, and how the fact that there is this term that people act as though it's legitimate called cancel culture lets people lump these things together and draw analogy and like the other things that are inside this term, right? Like the fact that people are getting online harassment, like the kind of harassment that is illegal and just like isn't really actionable, but is absolutely illegal, and we're calling that cancel culture. Like ContraPoints or yourselves, anyone on the panel who's been canceled, quote unquote canceled. Yeah, I'm sure you've gotten vicious online harassment that should very, very clearly be illegal. Does this have anything to do with you getting fired from your job because they saw a tweet that you made? It is a very completely separate thing that does come out of like an online hate mob mentality, but that's a very different thing than this nebulous cancel culture.
I don't really think that it is, because in order to enforce the firing, there has to be the same kind of collective movement on the part of enough people to enforce some form of pressure on a workplace. Like if somebody just said something on Twitter that was inappropriate, that's generally not going to get them fired. What has to happen is there has to be that sort of group of people which actually puts that information in front of the employer, because the employers are very rarely actually taking time out to monitor people's social media. It's explicitly a petition to institutional power that gets this stuff enacted.
Okay, I want to throw it over to Jack. Jack, you've got your hand up. So
yeah, all I really wanted to say there was I think that we're kind of circling around something that's like an interesting point to make there, is when we're talking about cancel culture, are we going to exclusively talk about material effect, like whether it affects someone's employment or their financial stability or security? Because obviously there are situations where myriad people have been cancelled and found massive financial success as a result of that. You know, so it's an interesting question there as to whether would that even qualify as cancel culture if you are like it's more lucrative, or should we consider the psychological impact and social coercive aspects of it?
I do have something to say.
Okay, that's fine. I want to give you a chance.
Yeah,
to
I'm throwing it out there as a general question.
But Cara, you've got your hand up as well. So Cara, what have you got to say?
Personally, I would almost argue that having been through a similar experience to it overall, I would argue that actually the psychological effects can be more significant, if not vastly more significant than the actual financial impacts. Usually, people don't seem to see much of a financial impact. In fact, sometimes they even see a financial
Exactly.
gain by having their name in the public discourse, and what it does is ends up creating a kind of a competitive dynamic where you have the people that are pro cancel that will just ardently talk about this person constantly, and then there's another set of people that ends up becoming fans of the character, right, or of the person. I'm calling an online figure character because that's generally happening, right?
True.
Who ends up becoming fans of the person, and ends up ardently supporting that person, which then leads them more likely to providing Patreon donations and various other circumstances. But I think even more important is the kind of psychological impact that kind of constant beratement and abuse can kind of elicit on somebody. Very rarely does it move towards the process of actually removing them. Like, how many campaigns have we had to have various right-wing people removed from YouTube or Twitter or whichever, only for them to just continue doing it, and finally 3 years after the initial campaign, finally they're removed because they actually did something that was like genuinely basically illegal, right? So ultimately, I think we have to not look as much at the financial impact as much as the psychological impact that can really push people into forms of depression and various other things that can cause a lot of pain for people. And that's specifically why I mentioned that I don't think that this kind of social system should be applied generally to minorities who are already under a tremendous amount of pressure within their day-to-day life. That doesn't mean they can just continue to be shitty people all the time, but we should recognize the impact that our words have on others, and try to minimize that negative impact as much as possible.
Yeah, so just to add to that real quick, I think that's what's interesting is are we gonna say that these are two separate things when we're talking about invoking some material institutional power to impact somebody, or whether we're just trying to talk about some kind of vague sense of social coercion which can manifest in a lot of different ways, or are we saying that those two things are very much the same?
I don't know about the
I guess
same.
it's just interesting.
I don't know about the same.
I wouldn't say they're the same. I'm just saying, would we argue that those both come under the purview of cancel culture, or are those two different phenomena?
I think they could, but it also depends on exactly how we get there. Because if it is something that ultimately, and here's the thing, I don't think that cancel culture is like mob justice or anything, but I do think that it comes down to certain incentives that are put forward by various platforms. And I think that given that, we a lot of the time end up with instances of what we might say kind of looks like cancel culture that maybe isn't, because we're talking about something that might actually be between a person and another entity of some kind, whether professional or whatever. But what I'm talking about specifically when I'm talking about cancel culture is the sort of mobilization of people through either a platform or perhaps not even through a platform that is made that their action causes some sort of either material or psychological problem in some way, particularly in this categorically speaking, like whether it be like taking somebody out of a space or removing, tarnishing their social connections so they're not able to, have a support network, or perhaps to integrate themselves into a community or a platform in some way. And I think that it is very possible that the exact same action could both get somebody fired from a job, as well as, but it's not necessarily the result that I think is as important as understanding that it is usually a sort of group action that we generally ascribe motive to, as opposed to as a response to the sort of process that's been established for how we do things on social networks, because it kind of functions as a little bit of a marketing campaign that people are taking part in, like a flash mob. It's not like when somebody does a flash mob, it's because somebody did like a hashtag and set it up, as opposed to everybody just deciding, oh, we're all going to show up at this one place at one time. I think that it's comparable to that. And if we're talking about that kind of phenomenon, I think that that's where we're talking about cancel culture. And I do think, again, to back up Kara on this, I think that there is a lot of the time a pretty heavy psychological effect. In some cases, more psychological than material. But
okay.
I do think there is also a material effect.
Okay, Mabase, you had your hand up there for a sec. I tell you what, everyone's being very polite, which is great. But listen, you know, I'm sure some people in the chat want some blood sports. So if anyone wants to like insult someone or, you know, please by all means go right ahead.
Chud, why are you talking like that?
Yeah, come on, Chud. Like the second I
Oh, God's
interrupted
sake.
Peter Coffin, you came in hard to shut me down, and so now I'm behaving. Like
That's true. That's true. I did come in
Can
quite
we
hard.
get a timeout on Chud, please?
yeah,
But listen.
like
you know,
like literally, I was going to reach for some clarification, and you
Okay.
came in hard, and like I'll respect your rules.
no,
You're the panel host.
listen. You know, it's about the battle. Like I like guests that like don't respect me. To be honest, you know, there's my favorite guest because they bring the most spice.
Okay.
Weird.
So,
What's in your
so
team?
Chud, just shut up, Chud, and let Mavis say speak.
Okay, no
I'm there,
problem.
right?
Mabase, go ahead.
Okay. Oh God, I think Kara's outside of the thing. She's in the green room. You have to pull her back
Oh,
in.
really?
She had
Oh,
an
for
issue
sake. Sorry, my bad.
with her mic.
Trying to deplatform in
Yeah.
the middle of the panel.
All right. Is she back? Can she hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So actually, I kind of like. I don't think this is like a thing, in general, right? But like one thing I do take this like a special exception to. So like I guess as a minority, I don't have a problem with people like dragging the fuck out of some other like a minority. So like someone who say was like a cis black man, possibly heterosexual, whatever the fuck, who's like, you know, up and down Twitter with some misogynoir, some transphobia, blah blah blah, and someone drags him for it. I'd like, dude, have at it. I have no idea. I have no idea how one would object to that just because he has it rough too. Like, okay, if anything, that to me honestly feels like he should know better, because if you have it rough, imagine how rough they have it. How would you justify you being a dickhead to someone?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, that like I think that we are in some respects just talking about like social pressure in a vacuum, and I don't think that necessarily it's kind of like when you think of political violence. There's like a paradox of tolerance situation where it's like you can't just say violence is bad because sometimes you need to do certain things to prevent certain things. And I think like when it comes to things like that, like say someone does something problematic, there can be an element of social pressure to get someone to change their behavior. And I don't know if I would say that's necessarily wrong. I think that's a more complex dynamic of like how we develop social behaviors. You know?
So I want to drill down on the definition Peter put forth a little bit more, just to clarify. So the big part, as I put it into my own words that I made sense of, it sounded like you're talking about social media accountability campaigns. Like it is a group of people that on social media want accountability for something, whether it's real or not.
It's possible. It's possible. I would say that it's also possible to happen outside of social media, though. I don't know that it's necessarily something I would consider exclusive to social media, although I think it's a lot easier to observe and track on social media, obviously.
Sure.
Yeah, I think if we look at like older phenomena like the kind of Christian mums against rock music video games from sort of the late 80s, early 90s, like that's the same sort of phenomena. I think it's kind of rooted in like very fundamental human behaviors. It's just that it's exacerbated now by social media, and that like everyone has access to these tools now, which is why this is like such a common topic of conversation.
Well,
So
and
go back like 20 years, you'd be talking about like the Dixie Chicks or something.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the
or
thing is,
Monica
you could
Lewinsky
even-
or whoever. Right?
It's my
But,
opinion that, let's say, you know, if we do want to go with a prominent social media example, Gamergate itself was a pretty big example of cancel.
Wait, sorry, Pete. Are you sure about this? Are you definitely pulling the trigger on Gamergate?
Wait.
You know this causes
No.
trouble.
No.
I would just like
Wait.
to say that I'm anti-Gamergate. I just want to
Yeah,
make that clear right
anti-Gamergate
now.
here.
Yeah,
I don't think it'll cause
I
any
don't-
trouble. Everyone on the
Hey,
panel is
we
anti-Gamergate, I'm pretty sure.
Anti-GG, okay?
I just called
Anti-GG
it
squad.
cancel culture.
Okay, so sorry, Pete. I just wanted to make sure, but please go ahead and finish making your point.
No, I think that, like, just to use that as an example, I think it's a very prominent example of a well-organized cancel culture campaign. I think that people mobilized along what started as obviously false allegations against a person, but as people were added to it, I'm sure a lot of people believed genuinely that these types of things were, or this type of accusation was not nonsense. That being said, it was built on misinformation, so it's not just a cancel campaign. It's also a misinformation campaign. I mean, you have things that it does intersect with, and I'm definitely not denying that. But
right, so this will be another example that I would point to like how cancel culture just muddies the waters and blurs lines between different things. Because Gamergate was at its core like a targeted harassment movement that used disinformation very, very successfully to drive like harassment at people from the safety of like this mob that they like this they created, basically, right?
But they also set up a content industrial complex around it. They constantly made videos about these people. They profited from it. They also, a lot of incentives were put forward by these social media things to engage in arguments, and this is a perfect source of argument. I mean, it goes much further than just like they did this to hurt people, because it's not just they did this to hurt people. They did this because it's an established mode of what they view as accountability, and then there are other actors that understand that it's possible to get something out of it.
So you don't think like the initial people were doing it just to hurt specific people they had isses with?
Why would you just hurt someone though? Like the guy was no. You hate them for a reason. You don't just hate things for no reason. That's like, this is the problem that I have with this type of talk. I think that when we start being like, well, they just hate them. The problem with that is they don't just hate them.
So Peter, let me. What the hell does why the person? I don't know whoever his name was, but why the person hated the targets of harassment tie into them wanting to build a like social media platform or empire so that they could talk about things? Like, I don't see any connection.
It has nothing to do with the individual's motives, and that's the problem here. There are incentives set up around it. It doesn't matter if that's the motive the original perpetrator of some nonsense is. What matters is that we are operating in an environment that incentivizes participation in this type of thing, and that fundamentally changes it from just this like, well, why do we do this? There's mechanically speaking incentives around it that bring more people into it, that make it seem like something that's viable, or in a lot of cases feel like getting justice against something. Like, I'm sure there's a large element of catharsis.
So this
with
this sounds, I agree more or less with what you're saying, but this sounds like a really like nuanced thing with a lot of different working parts going on.
Yes.
Why the fuck would you ever call this cancel culture and make people think that this is just one simple idea that can be addressed as a single thing?
I call Marxism for a reason. It's not easy. Like, I don't understand. Like, it's the thing that people know.
No,
like,
Peter. How many different things are there inside of Marxism?
A lot.
Like what?
I can't give you a number. There's at least 14.
Like what? What are some very different aspects inside of Marxism that aren't all part of?
I think we're getting a little off topic here. Well, I'm going to throw over to Kara. We don't have time to talk about Marxism. Sorry.
Sure.
I think too what we're kind of barreling down in on is something that we're recognizing that this is a social tool or social mechanism that can either be used for great good, as in the case of Harvey Weinstein, or for immense harm, as in the case of Zoe Quinn a la Gamergate. Right. Yes. The problem is that we're looking at a social mechanism that has no inherent morality within it, but instead it just describes a function that our society kind of fulfills in order to deal with potentially problematic actors, both in the progressive and the conservative mindsets, that could cause that. It's basically it's likening it back to my disfellowshipping. It is entirely a control tactic to kind of moderate the kinds of discourse that are allowed in the public sphere.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone feel like it's kind of the new version of political correctness as a term?
Yeah.
A little bit.
A little bit. Like I feel like everyone was saying political correctness, and then there was like a year where people weren't saying it, and now everyone says cancel culture when they're referring to similar things. At least in conservative circles, especially.
Sure,
I
especially
think
to the degree that like political correctness also didn't have good definitions and was just sort of thrown out
for
there.
sure. I think PC is more about like you're not able to like say or do certain things without like social repercussion, and that does kind of tie into cancel culture. Like if we're defining cancel culture or like including like social accountability, then like there's definitely like overlap there. But I think as kind of Kara was saying, to reiterate, that it's sort of more like a tool or a phenomena, whereas it's kind of morally ambiguous, in which it can be like either good or bad depending on like its usage. So like if you look at the Gamergate thing, or like other examples, like sometimes something can be well intentioned and then false narratives make it become hostile and like harassment based, or other times it can be good and it's holding like racist people to account and get them deplatformed.
Yeah, I guess intentions is kind of a tricky thing, because like you could say any number of like terrible things have like good intentions at the root of them. Like I could watch Birth of a Nation, right, and be like, well, they wanted to protect their town, but so like good intentions, that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Like it's the act itself, right? That's just like a little thing.
What I want to do, because look, I know Zanzi. Yeah, sorry, I was going to throw it to you, Zanzi. I know you're cooking up a good take, okay? So I'm ready for it. We're here for it. Let's go. Come on.
Because fundamentally, one of the things that's important to me is, like I mentioned at the very beginning, it's an umbrella term, and I get that annoys a lot of people. It annoys the ever-loving hell out of me too, because unfortunately we lost the naming rights of this thing. But the name fundamentally isn't that important. Now, cancel culture happens to be a simulacrum in that it's a cheap imitation of a set of vague ideas, and it represents an idea. We reify through those actions and how we actually engage in a lot of things. Like we've gotten at here, it tends to be a set of social behaviors. And I think one thing that we're kind of forgetting about is that the term cancel culture, kind of, it's the same thing happened to the word ideology in the late 1800s, where it stopped being used to describe a set of behaviors and started being used to apply a connotation to those behaviors. What happened to Louis C.K. we would not describe as cancel culture, but you fucking bet that the right does. While a lot of the things that we would describe as cancel culture, the people it happened to wouldn't. They would describe it as a hate mob. I completely agree with the perspective on it's seeking accountability, but it's to recognize that it's at its core, it's never really about individuals. It's the kind of like the collectivization of societies to speak in the only way that individuals within capitalistic societies can actually get meaningful access to power, which is collectively through groups. The way I sometimes think about it is that cancel culture, and the way we think about it, is essentially a sporadic communal vote of no confidence in the liberal institutions' idea of free speech, to basically say, no, the well is poisoned, we're taking away your right to speak on this issue, and we're not giving it back to you until you atone and basically amend all of the shit you've done. And what's annoying is because the word cancel culture does a piss poor job of explaining all of that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, like I think I wrote a little thing about it on Twitter the other day, and I feel like there's a reason that the right, generally speaking, aren't like labeled like the people who engage in cancel culture nearly as much. And I think that's because when you think about state power and corporate power, generally speaking, the right and the center like hold that. Mm-hmm. So they don't need like the social influence that like the left is desperate for. Like all we meaningfully have is some kind of social coercive power. So that's what we rely on a lot of the time to try to get something to happen, right? We don't have the powers that the state has or the powers that corporations have. So I think that's how it manifests a lot of the time in social and like the trying to collectivize into some kind of social force. Obviously, it's not effective a lot of the time.
Yeah, because it's in Peter's recent video. Peter, you asked a great question: that can we cancel Jeff Bezos? And I think we make the mistake of saying no when the reality is we don't have the power to. And there's a very big difference between not having the ability to do something and that thing not being able to done. If Jeff Bezos tomorrow decided, fuck it, I want to liquidate all my assets, become a Marxist, basically financially transform the institutional system, you know, the entire capitalist class would rally against him. This actually happened in Ireland back in the 1700s. There was a wealthy Marxist who wanted to leave all of his assets towards kind of like local communities. No, his family and the town basically got in there, done legal humbo jumbo, and stole the assets. Fundamentally, the issue is, and to a degree, we kind of saw it with Bernie Sanders. The institution fundamentally coalesced around their interests to say, no, you're not really going to get to talk here. We're going to put our interests forward. And again, it's the idea is more important than what we call it, because fundamentally words are just they're representations of ideas.
Right. And when we talk about like anyone at all being canceled, like this is ultimately being done by someone who has power over that person, right? And that's the thing, is that especially when the right talks about cancel culture, they do not bring into their understanding of the term at all, right? They say, oh, leftists are trying to cancel this person, blah, blah, blah. But no, like if someone got banned from Twitch, Twitch is the one that is banning them. It's not on anyone else. It's on whichever one of these structures that responded maybe to some like vocalizations being made. But the power is never actually in our hands collectively as individuals.
I would like to point out that for me, this whole cancel culture thing feels like just a framing battle, right? It's a good narrative to adopt in order to get people on your side, right? If you say that someone's trying to cancel you, like, oh, now there's something people can rally around. But if you say, hey, I said the N-word on Twitter, someone told my boss and I got fired. Like without the cancel culture framing, there's no one's gonna rally to your side, and that's what it seems like to me.
Sure.
Like, this isn't a thing. This is a framing device used so people can be able to have some way of reprisal against these actual powerful institutions. But in general, what we just call that you got fired, you got deplatformed, you got banned.
Right.
And now it's like canceled, and because it's a good rallying cry.
It is absolutely a rallying cry, and once again, it's why I hate the term canceled, and I think anyone who talks about things should avoid using it and say you got banned, because when you say cancel, it puts the power and the responsibility on the mob of individuals, and it takes away the fact that what happened to you is because of how much power corporations have, or how much power the state has, or how much power whatever actual group thing that actually took away your platform did. And also just most people who complain about cancel culture are just using victimization that isn't real to say like boo-hoo me and get their base really happy about them. All the right-wingers on YouTube whine about the demonetization that happens to all YouTubers as if it's some special attack on them.
Cara and then Peter.
I've got a couple statements to make. The first is what we see as cancel culture and the right's usage of it. I think ultimately is we're looking at the fundamental difference between how the left approaches these kinds of topics and how the right approaches these kinds of topics. The right approaches these kinds of topics from a narrative viewpoint, where they create like an abstract narrative that they can then use in order to drum up support amongst the right, to create kind of an emotional response, right? And it's entirely removed from the original context. So the follow-up question is, do we want to concede that, right? Because if we say, okay, we're just not going to use cancel culture anymore because the right's taken it, we give up that battle to the right entirely, right? So do we want to take the time to really try and reclaim it, I guess would be the word, similar to how we've reclaimed other slurs that used to be used against the queer community and black people, right? Do we want to reclaim that term, or do we want to just concede it? And which one's more, like, one of the examples I can give of us reclaiming successfully would be the Pepe meme, at which point now you don't know who's, like, at this point it's lost all of its kind of right-wing social.
But my point is that cancel culture as an umbrella term is inherently not a good term. And it's not the name of it. It's the concept of all these things that aren't interlinked usefully, and it damages the narrative to link all these things that aren't linked, and especially when it lets people, generally speaking, think that anytime they lose something is them being canceled. And so it doesn't matter if 5,000 people online caused Twitter to ban you, or if one individual got you banned, or if you got yourself banned for breaking TOS blatantly. It's all just called cancel culture. And it's terrible. And I think on the left, we should try to use terms that are actually useful and nuanced.
Okay, Peter, go ahead.
I think that that's assuming a luxury that the left does not have, and that's the ability to control the narrative. The right is the people who have ownership over the media. They have ownership over the state currently. Unfortunately, like when President Trump says cancel culture, that means we're talking about cancel culture. I don't like that. I don't agree with it. I think, again, like I completely agree with you that the term itself isn't enough. It's certainly not a good descriptor of the things that are going on, because again, it is complex, it is nuanced. But unfortunately, it's like saying you should educate yourself, working class. You should go learn this. I shouldn't have to tell you this. I shouldn't have to engage with the issue as they are presented to it. No, we have to meet people where we are. And that means we have to talk about quote unquote cancel culture, in my opinion.
No, exactly. That's what I'm arguing for, is that we talk about quote unquote cancel culture, and then we deconstruct the term and point out
I don't think you watched my video then.
If cancel culture is a real thing, the right is the one who does it, right? But you shouldn't
everybody
yourself
does. Everybody in
talk about
neoliberal
cancel
society
culture
does it.
like it's real.
It is real.
It's not real. It's a whole bunch of disconnected things. And sure, you could say,
okay,
sure, you know what, Peter Coffin? Yes, cancel culture is real in the way that race is real. Like, sure,
the way that
fine.
What's real? Sorry, I missed the word.
Race, right?
Okay. Yes.
If you're a cancel culture realist, then you're a race realist.
I can completely. I can agree with that very much, actually.
So you agree you're a race realist?
No, I agree that people who. That was a pretty dumb rhetorical trick you just did.
No, you accidentally agreed to me. Walk it back and say that you don't agree that being a cancel culture realist is the same.
I'm not a cancel culture realist. I'm talking about phenomena that exist. Race as a social phenomena does exist. However, as a biological category, it does not. That does not mean we do not talk about race from the perspective of race.
We talk about race. But every time
you literally made an argument that we should not bother talking about race. That's your argument here. We should not call it race.
Okay,
you're saying we should not call it race. Okay, that's your argument.
Peter, pause for 1 second. Everyone else on the panel, I'm going to go through you one on one. Tell me if I have said that we shouldn't talk about cancel culture. We shouldn't.
No, you said we should not call it cancel culture.
We should never use the words ever.
You said we should never use the words. We should not call it cancel culture. So by that logic, what you're saying is that we should not call race. So no,
we shouldn't call race. We should talk about deconstruct race. And
people know it as race.
Racism is real, so we should talk about race insofar as racism exists. But cancel culture isn't a real thing in the same way, and so we should be deconstructing it and not using it as
social phenomena. Cancel culture is a real thing.
Flat Earth theory is a thing that exists.
We call it flat Earth theory, right?
Yeah, and we talk about flat Earth theory. What we wouldn't say is we start entertaining it as a legitimate thing. Yeah, so in that respect, I think you completely agree with Peter.
I think you're right. So on that respect, we definitely do agree.
So I think that flat Earth theory exists, and I would never, ever, ever talk about flat Earth theory as if it's true.
I don't talk about cancel culture as if it's true. I deconstruct the phenomenon.
Okay, so this isn't what I've heard. It isn't what I've understood of what you've been saying on the panel, but I'm not holding you to that. I'm just going to say it's been a failure of communication. I'll try to.
Can I very quickly give an allegory that I think will clear this up?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
And then
we can Carver. Okay.
I had a light semester last year, so I basically just sat in on religion and global diversity. And one of my lecturers, who's a materialist, basically said the argument of whether or not God is real completely misses the point, because there are very real material effects of that idea in society. You ignored the entire point of the conversation to argue over whether or not there's an epistemic phenomena happening here. The effects are real. We study the effects. That's fundamentally what I'm getting at here, and I think we all agree on this one. The idea that cancel culture isn't real, I think we're getting into kind of an abstract conversation when we've already agreed that there are very real social consequences to this idea, and you even mentioned them yourself. It's seeking accountability within society. That is the material consequence of this idea, and how we do that are all of the different social behaviors and kind of like characteristics of how we try to use our institutions to seek these ideas. These are the connecting behaviors under this umbrella term. There is a linking thing in here, and it's why, again, I'll say it for the third time, I fucking hate the word because it does a really bad job of explaining all of this, but it's a very real thing, but we have to study its effects, not the origin of the idea itself.
Yeah. And two, to kind of highlight on where I was going is that ultimately, like, we didn't really get to choose the term cancel culture, because the way language works is that it builds upon previous references, both culturally and psychologically, that ultimately, individually, we have no control over. So is cancel culture a good term for the phenomena we're talking about? Absolutely fucking not. It's not good at all. Right, it misses a lot of the points. It doesn't take into account the full range of like human kind of argumentation and thought that we're going for here, and it ultimately reduces it down to an abstract idea that's really easy for you to say I agree or disagree with it, right? But what we really need, once again, we have to work from the framework that if we want cancel culture to remain the term we use for this phenomenon, or do we want to dive in deeper and find ourselves an alternative term that may be more accurate. But having said that, if we decide to do that, we concede cancel culture as an entire abstract idea to the right, because we no longer are talking about cancel culture. The problem is this has already entered the common nomenclature, so we can't ignore it at this point.
And the risk we run through doing all of this is that the ordinary person steeped in ideological false consciousness, to them it just looks like we gave up.
Yep.
And I will say, like, as a quick aside, that like I do think it's a tremendous shame that cancel culture has become such an all-consuming idea that like a variety of conversations that like could and should be had of like various social issues have to now be addressed under the umbrella of cancel culture. Like, I remember there was a brief period where it felt like people could talk about things like, I don't know, cultural appropriation or microaggressions or like these like smaller issues, but now if you were to even begin to like talk about anything like that, it's like, oh, we're talking about cancel culture, like, are you going to cancel people over that? It's like none of these like smaller issues can ever get like a fair discussion, because everything is just cancel culture. So on that end, I definitely understand any frustration people have about like needing everything to be like, let's talk about cancel culture, you know.
Well, actually,
the irony being that I'm on this panel, but
well, this actually leads me on to the, you know, I kind of want to focus the conversation in a new direction. Okay, that's, I think it's going to be interesting to explore. Obviously, one controversy that cropped up recently is Ben Burgess announced his new book, which is Cancelling Comedians Whilst the World Burns. And this then resulted in a backlash, I think is the best way to put it, across sort of Twitter. And it sort of soaked up a lot of discourse over the period of 24 hours. But I do think there's an interesting point to look into there. And it's, why are we talking about this when there's all this other stuff going on? Like, what makes this kind of necessary to talk about now, you know? So what are our thoughts on that? I think probably, to be honest, Peter, you're probably the best person to go to on this, because you've just made a video about it, right? So why have you made a video about this when there's all this other shit going on? You know, that's... Yeah.
Well, because it's an ideological barrier to actually addressing all the other shit going on. Like, if the president comes up and says, they're trying to cancel us, we're trying to... all that nonsense, that then acts as a distraction. And if we do not, unfortunately, engage in attempting to sort of demystify or take apart or put a lot more thought and connection to these types of nonsense, like frankly, like the fact that he can get up and talk about cancel culture and people don't go, so he's talking about when people do blank. No, they're in control of the state, they're in control of the media, they're institutionally much more powerful. They get to set what that term means. They get to attempt to push forward some sort of either consistent or inconsistent idea about it. I would err on the idea that more inconsistent, but sorry.
Like, I don't understand why you would then, if they control the narrative, if they control like what the term means, you would be struggling to redefine the term to mean something different on the left, instead of taking the term, turning it around because it's a metaphorical canon, and you point it back at them, the way we do with snowflake, for instance. Right?
Honestly, it kind of feels like the real fucking term. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, President Trump says cancel culture. Here's what I do. I say, all right, well, here's what you could be referring to when you're talking about cancel culture. Here's some background on it. Here's systemically what I believe about it. These are the incentives that are put forward to engage in such a thing. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know what you want me to do other than...
Yeah, sure.
If you just, no, hold on. Let me finish.
You to do. Let me just finish.
Well, you can address the question when I finished actually making my statement, okay? What I was saying is that you cannot act as though President Trump does not say cancel culture. You cannot, when something is perceived to be under that umbrella, you cannot act as though most of the country does not perceive it that way, because that is the way that we lose. We concede these things. We look like we have nothing to do with it. Or in the case of when we say cancel culture doesn't exist, these people then go, look, they're the ones that do it because they deny it exists. I'm sorry, but it's foolish. It's absolute nonsense to say, like, oh, well, let's just never use this word.
Okay, once again, so you don't understand my argument, and I'm going to assume that the fault is on me and not on you, because you clearly don't understand. So I'm going to rephrase it,
right?
okay?
This is pretty bad passive aggression right here, actually.
I'm going to rephrase my argument in the hopes that it comes across better, okay? So when Trump... Wait, Peter, shut the fuck up. You didn't want me to interrupt you. Let me speak for a second. Holy fuck. Okay. When Trump goes up on stage and says, the left is canceling us, we need to fight against them, we don't just say, oh, cancel culture isn't real. No, we go and we say, fucking Trump is the real cancel culture. Trump is the one who got... I don't remember his name, fired from the NFL because he was making a statement. Trump is the one who is forcing trans people out from homeless shelters. Trump is the one who is using power to actually cancel people. We don't try to co-opt their term that means to most people what the right thinks it means. No, that saying that they are the real cancel culturers is not using the term as it is defined. It is not.
Okay.
Right. No, but yeah, wouldn't it be, you're saying what you're using their definition and pointing it back at them. Wouldn't that be what you're doing?
Sure, but when I'm talking about real issues, I wouldn't then call that cancel culture. I would say whatever the right
you just said he's the real cancel culture.
Right. Because it's a nonsense term that doesn't mean anything. Because it's a nonsense term that doesn't mean anything useful objectively, but it can be useful as a weapon. That's why the right creates buzzwords.
But then I have to ask, where did the term come from? Because we know where it came from, right? The term came from us, more or less. The term came from the left to describe something.
Where it actually began, the term itself.
New Jack
video. It was like one specific video, right?
Yeah, but then
it was on Hip Hop New York.
But then it was
actually. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
But then it was popularized and used by us to describe a phenomena which obviously we understand as being far more complicated than it actually is, right? But unfortunately, they didn't understand that. They saw Donald Trump did this with fake news back when he was originally getting elected. He saw, oh, there's this fake thing called fake news. Fake news must be things that are criticizing me, right? So he did the same thing with fake news back then. He's doing the same thing with cancel culture right now, right? The reality is that these are terms that we generally bring up, and the right co-opts them. So the question then becomes, how do we change the narrative on those? Like, more or less, like, to kind of give an example of it, one thing we're doing fairly well at it is the misappropriation of Antifa, right? We haven't abandoned the term. We're holding on to it. We're telling you, okay, if you're anti-Antifa, then you're pro what? Right, but we have to elaborate on the topics. We have to approach the conversation and add the nuance that's not there. Because if we don't, then once again we just allow them to fall into Trump.
So
right, we have to discuss this, like Peter just did it in his recent video.
Okay, I want to throw it over to Mabase, okay? Because I'm trying to sort of push the conversation on a little bit because I feel like we're getting stuck on the sort of definition. But look, Mabase, I want to throw this over to you, okay? Now, obviously, there's a lot going on in America at the moment. There's a lot going on around the world. What are your thoughts? And listen, look, I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here because I'm doing a fucking panel about it. But what are your thoughts on the idea of speaking about cancel culture at this length and having books and videos about it? What do you think, Mabase?
What is it?
Like, is there any point? Like, is it worth it?
I don't know. Is it worth it? I don't know. I think that even like asking that question like is kind of like the fallacy of relative privation, right? Like, we can do both at the same time, right? Like, we can go like Black Lives Matter march in the street and then go home and like, I don't know, do a tweet thread about why cancel culture is bad or good or doesn't exist or whatever. I think it's possible, but I don't know. For me, I guess if it's an established term, if we're talking to people, right? Like, for me, it's like it's not a thing. You're talking about a very specific thing, and now it's being called this because it's useful to call it that. Which, okay, we can engage on that level, and typically like okay, well, what you're calling whatever to me was a good thing. That guy getting fired for using the N-word on Twitter because someone told his boss, to me, is a good thing, because there's no way in hell that he's holding those thoughts just to himself. He probably is in some ways, whether either be like implicitly or explicitly racist to coworkers and shit at work. Like, okay, so I'll engage in that way, which I think is a useful way, and it also puts the person talking about it on the back foot, because then they have to defend that person.
Okay, look, Mabase, look, just for everyone that's listening, okay, for all the people out there waiting to like clip me to cancel me, okay, like, hold fire, because I'm playing devil's advocate here, okay. But Mabase, I want to ask you, right? So, if someone, this isn't a position I agree with necessarily, I just want to ask you it to push the conversation forward.
Sure.
Right, Mabase, what about the idea, though, that if someone is using social media in their free time outside of work, why should that then have an impact in work?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for me, as a far leftist in general, I would put myself on more of a libertarian bent. Definitely, I don't really like the idea of people being organized in ways where they have authority over other people unless we absolutely need them to be. But as of where we currently stand, when you work at a company, like, you're signing on to also be somewhat of one of their representatives, right? Like, when you go out on the world, you go on vacation, you tell someone, hey, I work at blah blah blah, or what do you do? It's like, that's taken as like you're almost like an extension of the brand. Sadly, that's neoliberal capitalism. That's how ever it is. The market has infected everything, right? So when you go on social media on your free time and you're fucking talking about poo in the loo and 1350, and then someone finds out like, hey, this is a guy who works at blah blah blah, it goes like if they bring it up to them, like they have to make that calculated decision. Like, do we want the poo in the loo guy? How much is it going to cost us to keep the poo in the loo guy? Like, I don't know.
So Mavis, I don't like that you're ceding the authority of businesses to fire their employees in this way. And I would rather just say, like, it's a bad thing when businesses fire employees for things they're doing outside of work. But in this case, I'm going to celebrate the person got fired because I don't like them for other reasons, right? I wouldn't sign on to the concept and just celebrate it happened this one time. It's good.
really, I feel like that puts me on a rhetorical back foot, because if I say like,
Yes.
oh well, it's good this time because I hate this person, I look like a dickhead, and who's going to want to listen to me? I seem very engaging and motivated reasoning there, right?
Yes.
Sure,
Totally agree.
If you don't think you can rhetorically sort of handle the position, I wouldn't like push you to take it on. But I'm just saying how I would personally do it, because I'd be very happy to say like, hey, I don't like it when people die. I am actually anti-death personally, but when Hitler died, I was happy. That's right.
Well, and to like when we're looking at kind of the cancel culture impact on employment scenarios, right? If somebody is engaging, unfortunately, when it comes to bigotry, you cannot just like shame somebody out of bigotry, right?
Yes.
There needs to be material consequences for what they do, right? And unfortunately, under our current society, we collectively don't have the power to make these people kind of feel the consequences for the dehumanizing efforts that they engage in, right? If somebody calls somebody the N-word or uses the T slur, right? Really, like, we need some way that we can have an effect on them. And unfortunately, the only way that we can do that right now is via employment, right? Via their access to our means of sustenance. And it's a really shitty position to be in as leftists, because we're like, I don't think anybody should have that much control over their employer.
Yes.
But we need some sort of material consequences. Otherwise, these people will be continued to, if they face no consequences for what they've done, they'll continue to behave in such a way publicly. And if somebody is, there was a recent example of a mother who took her trans son onto video and was then saying, this is my daughter dead name, right? And kept going on and on about it while wearing a shirt from her employer, right? And she ended up getting fired for what she did, right? I'm all for supporting that, but then when a trans person gets fired for coming out, right, I'm like, well, that's frustrating. Unfortunately, we're kind of in a catch-22. We can't cede the fact that that's how power is exercised in our current society. We just have to recognize that that this is not necessarily a moral mechanism, and we need to eventually advocate for change. But that doesn't mean it can't be useful now.
So ethical cancellation under capitalism.
Wait,
yeah, I would just like tweak it the tiniest bit, right?
Yeah.
I would just tweak it to say like, I will thoroughly say that I do not want companies to have this power over people, and they shouldn't have it. And that also, in the meantime, while it exists, I'll use it. And I don't think that shows any logical inconsistency at all. And we could all argue our way out of that.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right on that.
Okay. So yeah.
Wait,
I mean,
hang on. Can I say something real quick on something that was just said?
Make it spicy, and you can, yeah.
Okay, I do think it's interesting that the position that you can't shame someone out of bigotry, like that, in terms of the actual conversation, I think would be quite interesting, as like the role that shame does play in influencing, because you can definitely shame someone out of certain behaviors. Yeah. I definitely think that can happen. I think that the idea that you could shame someone out of their beliefs, that's maybe like that's interesting anyway. Like I think. In some context, definitely. Right. I don't know. I feel like that's a relevant.
I was speaking quite generally in that. I don't mean literally. That's exactly how it is in every case, but more or less, like if I go up to a transphobe and saying like, "Shame on you for calling me my dead name. Shame on you for doing this. Shame on you for doing that." They're like, "I don't give a shit. I don't even see you as human."
but that's specifically the thing that cancel culture, I guess, like as a rhetorical device, is like hedging on, is the idea that you could shame, like in some contexts, that you could shame someone out of certain behaviors, which I do think can sometimes be the case.
Right. So like trans people, I think, would be a good example, like especially older trans people. Many of them have been shamed out of like accepting to themselves that they are trans, and it's just not an idea that they can hold in their head and still feel like a good person even, right? And to the same degree, I think it is certainly theoretically possible to shame people out of bigotry. I'm gonna bigger enforcement.
I'm gonna say for an example of this, Big ups to the rapper No Name. She was a hotep. Black Twitter went to work, and now she's a fucking black radical Marxist. Okay, we did it, boys. Easy clap.
Just out of curiosity, I've seen that term, and I'm not sure exactly what it means. What does it hotep mean?
Hotep?
Yeah. I've tried to look it up, but I've seen mixed.
They're essentially like this weird hot. They're kind of like a. So they started off more so as like a weird Afrocentric movement based on this one book that came out in academia about how a lot of the mythology and cultural things and the people where people were trained in philosophy came out of like ancient Egypt, and then there's like this weird thing about these people being darker and some of them being black, which is true because it's like right next door to like Nubia, and it's a transitive space or whatever. So then they like just kind of honed in on that, like, oh, there were black people there, and there's like a big fucking empire, and they did stuff, and they were smart, right? And then they're just like,
oh, okay,
it just ballooned out.
It's
from
a
there
pretty
umbrella. So weird reactionary shit.
It's a pretty umbrella term at this point, correct?
No, I more or less understand it now. I was curious.
Okay, so one thing off the back of that then that we're talking about. So we agree that, well, there seems to be some sort of agreement that maybe shaming someone can change their beliefs. But what about making someone lose their job because they said something racist, or they're racist, or both? Does that actually have a positive impact on that person's beliefs? Does it make them a better person, or does it maybe make them double down and think, well, this is ridiculous, I've been fired for this, like I'm gonna fucking go and search out spaces where this is acceptable and perhaps move them down a darker path? Like, what do we think? Peter, go ahead.
I think it's the latter. I think that's actually kind of where you start seeing the folks that end up building like careers on getting canceled. You start seeing those types. They'll go into spaces where they're sort of more welcome for having whatever bad belief that they've been shown to have. I think that, yes, I think that when you take material away, when you materially take something away, for instance, job means, economic security to be able to pay rent, food, et cetera, that more or less places them in an adversarial position with who they perceive to have, quote unquote, taken those things, even though ultimately it's an expression of institutional power. It's the employer that has actually done it. The reason that this quote unquote cancel culture is kind of the phenomenon is because it's often, again, through sort of incentivized movement by a group of people petitioning institutional power to actually make that action. Whereas I think ultimately, in dissecting the phenomenon, we can only come back at, and I think this is where Catherine and I will probably find the most agreement, actually, is that it is an expression, again, of that employer's institutional power and not otherwise.
Yeah.
But again, they make enemy. The reason, and to cap that off, the reason why it's important to talk about it from this perspective is because if you can start from where they are, where they think cancel culture is mob justice, and actually extrapolate to the point where we're talking about where that power actually comes from. Even if you're talking about like platforming, for instance, like whoever is executing, whatever cancel, campaign is going on, they're always going to be a child platform of a larger platform, a parent platform. And it's the parent platform's power, but it gets, it's embodied by the group doing the cancel action or the person doing the cancel action as a sort of avatar for it. And that's usually where the hate gets put. So if you're a trans person who, gets enough trans people to contact somebody's employer and they take that away because somebody said something transphobic, let's say on Facebook, you end up with that person going, oh, trans people got me fired. But ultimately, it is the choice of the employer, and it is it's institutional power being exercised. That's what all of this is, and it's incentivized. This is my key conceit. These behaviors happen because they're incentivized by institutional power.
Sorry. Anyone go ahead.
Otherwise, I hope I'm not repeating anybody here.
Oh, your mic is like roboting and stuff.
That's what I'm worried by.
It's like a crackle on top.
Tone's ruined.
Do you have a quick fix so we can pass it to Kara?
Pass it on, see what I can do.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. I think that it can have a positive. I agree with Peter more or less that depending on how ingrained this behavior is, the person will generally become slightly more reactionary as a process of that happening. But ultimately, I think the effect is generational, in that disallowing certain types of being able to perform publicly decreases the chances that that same type of speech will be performed privately, right? And so therefore, either their children or their children's children will end up becoming more progressive over time. But I don't think that change is necessarily quick enough to actually count on in the short term. Generally, our society tends to be more like slowly progressive as people start to gain their voices, but we can't necessarily always count on it progressing in the short term, and we can't always count on the kinds of disciplinary actions being effective in the short term.
I think it's important just to like make clear that it is a good thing to get people fired if we can and out of these workplaces, whether or not it is effective at making those particular people change their minds.
I do more or less agree with that. It's ultimately a net positive effect.
Okay. What?
So did I miss Chud getting roasted? Hang on.
Wait, I'm always getting roasted on my stream. That's how it goes. It's because unlike well, obviously not you included in this, Jack.
What was that?
Listen. Okay, just a side note that we need to cancel all Americans for being so fucking egotistical, okay? Like, oh my fucking god. Like, not everyone's guilty of it, obviously, but fuck me, it's annoying, you know?
Mate, don't pander to me.
No, listen. I include you in that a little bit because I think the influence of the culture over there is having an effect on you. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if I consider you British anymore.
Honestly,
I started saying taco instead of taco. Ruined me.
Honestly, I'm Canadian. I'm rested in the fact that my country is definitely, absolutely, 100% better than the United States and has no problematic aspects whatsoever. Obviously.
Okay.
I would say, I don't know if anyone's said it yet, but I think that when it comes to those employment things, there is often like a certain amount of decontextualization that happens when we talk about it in the abstract like this. Like, if you have a racist in a workplace, like, it isn't like the negative would be like, get out, and then it's a neutral thing if the racist is, if there's the racist and then like the minority both in the workplace, that isn't neutral. That's like that can be interpreted as a negative situation in and of itself, right? So like, you know, if I'm choosing to like eject the racist from the workplace, you know, that can in and of itself be saying like, you're not welcome here, making the space more welcome for minority people. Sorry, that sounded kind of garbled, but you know what I mean. Like, it's not a neutral thing to have like the racist continue to be in the workplace.
Absolutely. If I have a transphobe at my workplace and they're being absolutely garbage to me, I'm going to want them fired because it's making my work environment terrible, right? That in terms of like, once we're talking about short term versus long term, that's the short term positive of that kind of an effect, right? It'll make the workspace more accepting to the minority in question.
Okay, but Carl, let me ask you a question then. Okay, so let's say it's the same transphobe, okay? But at work they treat you like you know, they don't treat you any differently to anyone else. Okay, they treat you like any other employee, right? But it's difficult because like you know that they've made like a transphobic post on social media in their free time, right? But it doesn't affect the way that they deal with you at work. Like, do you think that
if in my opinion, if the person does not behave in a transphobic manner in my presence and does not seek me out on social media to behave in a transphobic manner outside of my presence, I have no problem, because then eventually that person is going to humanize me. Eventually that person will start to recognize me as a human being, and they'll start to come to understand that I'm not a terrible person, right? That kind of creating an environment where you are that you're not allowed to be like here in Canada, and I was joking a minute ago. But in some respects, Canada does have generally a more progressive attitude when it comes to workplace harassment and whatnot. In general, where I live, if somebody were to be transphobic to me, not only would I be able to go to the employer, but the employer would be mandated to remove that person or take disciplinary action because of the workers' rights laws within British Columbia, which is the province I live in, right? So that's a good thing. That is institutional power being used to leverage that. That over time will lead to that transphobic person not only being required to work with with people that they may not necessarily have wanted to work with before, but it'll also mean that I have the institutional backing should that situation eventually come up that will allow me to remove that person from the workplace in an effective manner without having to engage in some sort of public campaign.
And like, this should be pointed out, is like, it is not thought crime that we're trying to get rid of, right? It is people actually making workplaces worse for coworkers, right? This is what.
Well, look, this actually speaks to look. I don't want to drag up old drama or anything like that, okay? But I'm going to a little bit because why not? Obviously, there is like a small YouTuber who caused some controversy on Twitter with some takes about, this sort of stuff. And Maya Forstater, is that correct? Was kind of brought up as an example of cancel culture. And I think Peter, like, not to put you on the spot too much, but I'm going to. At the time, it was kind of perceived that because of your interaction with this person, you were then defending Maya Forstater, but then you sort of came out and said, "Oh no, I don't agree." Like Maya Forstater, like I don't kind of agree with that take on that. Like, what was your position on that? Like, what are your thoughts on like the Maya Forstater?
My understanding was that she was actually like transphobic at work, was she not? And that's specifically why I don't like. It's my understanding that it was actually something that happened at work.
Sure. Okay. So
she also worked for a human rights organization that was directly involved in advocating for trans people's rights. I believe she wasn't he? Or at least some sort of human rights in general. So that's a specific conflict of interest in her case, and absolutely 100% in the right to terminate her contract.
Well, yeah,
to choose to renew.
Yes.
Okay.
Especially.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just to clarify, is this the woman that J.K. Rowling was defending?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, right. So yeah, this was specifically making a hostile workplace.
Okay. So it sounds like everyone just basically agrees then that if it's causing an impact in the workplace, then that's when actually the institutional power has to come into effect to protect the trans person or the marginalized person. But sorry, go ahead.
They have rights as a worker as well, and it's frankly unfortunately, it does have to be mediated through the employer. But if the employer is not involved, then the employer maybe shouldn't be involved.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, look, I don't. The way I sort of liken it is to say like, we should always aim, where possible, to side with the worker, right, over the company. Like, as a leftist, I think that's a fairly good position.
Yeah.
But then if it's between a worker and one worker's being egregious to the other worker, well then you've got to side with the worker that's in the position of vulnerability or something. Like, that's kind of how it's
sure. So I think like a useful like hypothetical is like, if hypothetically we wanted to be really strong on the worker's side, we should say the business is at fault for this hostile workspace, and it's up to the business to pay the person they're firing because they allowed them to come in and be harmful. But this way, it doesn't harm the worker who's being fucked out of a job. And like, I'm perfectly fine with something like that.
Yeah, and to be clear, in theory, that's something that like a union could maybe do, but like there's no union power, especially in the US, so it's left to a social media campaign. Like I kind of touched on that in my last video.
That's a good way to get chuds on the side of the unions, then, huh?
And just to clarify, right? Obviously, firing isn't the go-to, right? Like if fucking going to whatever classes actually can reform this person into acting like a human being at work instead of a bigot, then great.
No, I definitely agree with that. Like, if there's some avenue to actually make some form of progress on it, obviously that should at least be explored.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Mabasay.
I would like to I don't know. I guess I would caution against the I don't know, the especially hopefulness when it comes to unions, especially in a society like the United States.
Yeah.
Like,
I
oh
totally
god.
agree.
Yeah, no, that's
Historically,
with all of the
unions
right.
have been shit at that kind of thing. I'm talking in a theoretical way.
Yeah,
You know, theoretically, that's
Well,
something that there could be some institutional power. Historically, unions have sucked at most things. No, but like specifically when it comes to like racial and discrimination, various things.
And all of the right to work laws in individual states are going to get in the way of that anyway. So.
Okay, cool. Right, so another area to focus topic on. I know you've got about 20 minutes or so left, Peter, and then I think I'm going to get someone else on too to take Peter's place for the last hour. But what I want to talk about is, like, obviously, I'm sure we'd all agree as lefties, broad systemic change is the optimum way to fix this problem. But in lieu of that occurring, what can we do in the short term to help address these issues, do you think?
So one.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. No,
Okay.
sorry.
So one really limited thing is if someone transphobic or otherwise bigoted is getting canceled and you know them or are a big enough creator to reach out to them somehow, I think it's worth doing. Because as we were talking about, like, this is a thing that can cause radicalization of people's beliefs. And if you have the ability or like spoons to reach out to this person and interact with them, it can be really, really helpful. Because like I know in my personal experience, I have talked to a lot of right-wingers and they aren't all evil monsters, right? It's just that the talking points and the ideology that gets spread can consolidate them more firmly into positions. And the more firm they are, the more they're going to like fight back against being argued with. And so reaching out to people who have like just been fired and say like, look, I think maybe you should have been fired, but this system where this happened is terrible. And I'd love to talk to you about it, and sort of like come with empathy in one hand and try to like, make a conversation.
I think there's a lot of
definitely
value
like that approach.
in
That's good.
approaching people like that, or right wingers in general, and just showing that like the left isn't a monolith. Like although we disagree with you, we're kind of on your side, and we're willing to point out these people who are taking things too far, even if that means conceding a little bit of ground. I think it's important to get the true message across and allow them to kind of get beyond the like death threats or whatever bullshit they're getting unnecessarily.
To allude to the free speech meme, I may disagree with you and a lot of your politics and your opinions, but I will absolutely defend your right to a proper work environment and full compensation for your labor, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm actually glad because this fundamentally talks to the point that, just checking in, my mic okay now?
No.
Still crackling, but we can hear you. So
Yeah, we can understand.
This is driving me absolutely nuts.
We'll just pretend we're talking to an Android or something. Go ahead.
This fundamentally touches on the point that I wanted to talk about, where that we're focusing on systems, not individuals. Very few transphobic individuals are born transphobic. They're turned into this through societies. Gramsci spoke to this exactly, in that how ruling classes create ideological modes of being through co-opting institutions to create societies that will lead towards the domination of proletarian classes. This is a key aspect to why I'm afraid of like the previous conversation we were talking about, where if the only avenues towards seeking our rights are to engage with capitalism in the way it wants us to, we're not actually fundamentally doing the leftist fight. We're still doing something important, which is contributing towards giving people dignity and making them safe in their workplaces. But we're basically social democrats, if we're really being honest about this. We have to fundamentally address the actual ideological perspectives of how society is approaching these things. And that is why what Catherine said is so important. It's actually reach out and try to talk to that person to let them know that they individually might be a horrible person, but they individually can be saved. It was society that fucked them over more than anything. And they can be angry at society and be redeemed as individuals, because fundamentally, the way I put it is like, when everything's done and over and we have a revolution, I don't want to have to line a third of the people up against a wall and do lovely things to them in Minecraft. So the point is to construct societies where fundamentally we can actually live in harmony. That's not possible under capitalism. They want it that way, so we can't play on their terms. We have to find our own way of doing it. Take advantage of the rights as they're given to you, but understand that rights are fundamentally a liberal perspective. We have to find our own way of achieving these ideas.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. I think, again, a lot of it is the result of the fact that, you know, institutionally, we have no state power, we have very little capital influence. So all we really have is some degree of social influence. And I think that we can kind of rest on our laurels to some respects and just be like, well, that's what we have, so let's just use that, rather than to pursue those other means that would, like, once we have like more of that, then we can start thinking about like other meaningful systemic solutions rather than just these like individual, well, if we get everyone together and we all say no, then maybe that something will happen. No.
It's funny because every point that comes up does make me want to like restate, I don't think we should be using the term cancel culture. The reason I'm thinking right now is that, like, if you say we should use this right now to your community, and you say we should get this person canceled or something like that, to some people in your community, that means you should send them death threats. To some people in your community, it means like all kinds of different things. And what you actually mean is like, let's lobby on Twitter to get them fired, baby, right? And I think being more precise is better, generally speaking, unless you're reaching out specifically to right-wingers.
Well, you know, I think to some extent, it's not necessarily a good idea to like approach people and say, let's lobby on Twitter to get somebody fired either. I think that's maybe not great framework either. I think maybe what we're talking about is more along the lines of needing to be able to at least point at something as a behavior that needs to be changed and perhaps work with people on the idea of like, well, what can we do to actually approach this person? Or if we approach them and it doesn't work, what do we do then? Et cetera, et cetera. I think it's almost better to frame it as a process that starts with, hey, this person said this thing in the community. I would really like it if we could do something to address this. So
that's actually a really good point, but fuck you. I go on Twitter all the time, and I try to get Trump canceled and fired from his job. Just get that fucker out.
To do that, you gotta go vote in November. No, I'm kidding. What I would like to see personally is more people doing kind of what Peter did today. Like I'd like to see a lot of the more influential left tubers to hop on and really like dig into cancel culture and provide the nuance that's missing. Right? Unfortunately, we've kind of and yes, like ContraPoints has done it, but we need less controversial figures. ContraPoints, we can assume that she's just doing it to save her own skin, right? Even when Peter dives into it, sometimes it can seem like Peter's just trying to save his own skin, right? We need like a lot more people to start talking about it and saying, "Hey, this is a thing, but it's more complicated than you think it is," right? And I'd really love people to provide the nuance that's currently missing on the topic.
Yeah, like large creators that haven't been canceled speaking out about cancel culture being more nuanced than people think would be great.
That would be a very small group, but yes.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. That's so great.
But following off from Kara's point, what's incredibly important there is that we have a diversity of opinion actively critiquing and engaging with the idea of cancel culture itself, so that we can actually achieve a really good dialectic towards trying to get at the root of the idea rather than critiquing the individual personality. Because, like, here's the god honest truth: if Peter ContraPoints, if all of the controversial figures were cancelled successfully, held accountable for all of the perceived ills that have been done, the idea still remains, and we haven't gotten any closer towards actually meaningfully addressing anything in society. We have to achieve a proper dialectic by actually critiquing the idea and having that back and forth.
And it hasn't been mentioned, but it's really good to point out that the biggest issue, like even if Peter and Vosh and ContraPoints should be canceled, even if that were true, the downsides are bigger because there's so much in-community infighting when it comes to just random fans of these people and hating each other, and it completely destroys any attempt to build a broader left movement. And I think whether or not you hate specific creators, and I hate some, that's fine, but don't fucking hate people who like them, and even with those people, at least talk to them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like the Michael Brooks line, like, be kind to people and harsh to systems, something like that.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's right.
yes, exactly.
I mean, I think that like I've been talking a lot. I'm going to self-suck a little bit because, you know, it's my stream, whatever. But I've been talking about like cancel culture recently and giving my takes on it. And I've also been talking about like parasocial relationships. And I think it all starts to link in together, right? So you end up in this situation where someone is being quote unquote cancelled, and you've got like the stans viciously defending them, and then the anti-stans are coming in. It's like a massive fucking battle on Twitter, and it's like all over this one human being who has got like quite a lot of subs on YouTube, but what does that really mean in the grand scheme of things, you know?
When any kind of fandom gets involved, it doesn't fucking matter what anyone did. Like, most of the time the context immediately gets lost, and it's just like, well, I like this guy and I don't like that guy, so he's probably right and he's probably wrong, you know. It's just in those situations, like any kind of like, I think I do this, and I think Peter tries to do this in their work, is just try and like eliminate this like notion of fandoms as much as possible, because that obfuscates the idea that like we should criticize like the ideas that people have, rather than being like this person as like a monolith.
Right. Like, oh my god, it would be so much more useful in any of these cancellations that have happened on the left if people had come out and made a big argument about why the idea put forth was wrong, instead of the creator being wrong.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Like, this is why I in many ways hate the cancel culture discourse. Because it's like with Natalie, with ContraPoints, it was like she kind of fell into this Buck Angel discourse, and it's like, well, I actually think that's like a really interesting conversation about what qualifies as platforming, but we jump so heavily and like quickly into cancellation discourse that like the nuances of that just immediately disappeared.
Yeah,
you know.
Where was I going? I had it, and it's gone now. Give me like 5 seconds, and I'll probably.
I distracted you. I'm sorry. Let me just hang on. I'm just gonna do this for a while.
Here, I'll let somebody else speak, and if it comes back to me, I'll put my hand up again.
I'll just take a moment to engage in some call-out culture and say, Mike from PA/Central Committee, let's have a talk, buddy. Unblock me from your Twitch community. Wait. I don't like being blocked. It sucks.
Where is Mike from PA? Is he in chat? Oh, sorry, Carl, go ahead.
No.
So what I was going to do is I mentioned in my opening statement kind of how my family is kind of complicated. We as a family unit, we've gone to tons and tons of counseling and therapy and all that fun stuff. And so I'm sure Peter has responded to me saying this when I was talking about it last year. But basically, where my stance comes from, like, we need to understand fundamentally that we're dealing with people. Right, and you can empathize with people and put yourselves in their positions, and you can understand where they're coming from. Right, what I think was happening and tended to happen in my family is you develop this kind of abstract idea of what you think the other person thinks and what you think the other person is doing, and you think what their motivations are, when you don't recognize that fundamentally nobody views themselves as the bad guy. Right, fundamentally everyone views their own actions as justified. Right, so you have to look at the way somebody's acting and say, all right, well, how can I imagine this person's actions in a way that makes them look good? Because that's very likely the way they're approaching it, right? And once you do that, you can then work from there and try and bring them to understand that what they're doing wasn't quite great, but they're not an evil person for it. Because once it becomes that emotional kind of response, they're far less likely to listen to you. They're far less likely to understand what you're talking about, and far more likely to retreat into their little shell. And particularly when you have these fandoms and parasocial relationships, they're retreating into this kind of like a pedestal turtlehood, where they've got all these people that are telling them they're great, they're awesome, they're perfect, right? But they're kind of hiding from the ultimate criticism that they could be receiving if we were really engaging with them as people and not concepts.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, what I want to do is I want to just kind of go through a few cases of cancellation or attempted cancellation that have kind of soaked up discourse recently that I think are kind of interesting as case studies, and I just want to, you know, get people's thoughts on it really. So the first one, if I say college professor email, does everyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
So let's go. Let's get into that.
Why don't you reiterate for the audience, or for those of us who do not know what you're talking about?
Okay,
right
look,
now?
I'll do the best I can. Okay, but explanationing isn't always my strong point. But here we go. So
here I'll do it for you. Chud,
okay, go on. Go ahead.
It's really fucking.
Are you
simple.
really going to get a guest to do it for you?
Yeah. Why
What?
not?
No, I'm offering. Okay, it's really fucking simple, and that's why I'm going to do it. Okay.
Okay.
There's a student at a university who got the professor's course list and said, "Hey, professor, why aren't there more black people as writers in the stuff we're studying?" And the professor said, "Hey, there's actually a whole bunch of multicultural stuff in all these sources. It so happens none of the 6 authors is a black person, but that doesn't mean the course itself isn't good." And from that, this student is trying to get that professor fired.
Okay. Does anyone disagree with that characterization, or think there's more nuance that needs to be injected into that? Or does everyone agree that's a pretty fair? Okay. So what do we think about that? Is that like a fair use of the systemic kind of power that we're speaking about, or is it an overreaction? What does everyone think?
Well, fundamentally, it comes down to the idea that they're trying to get a university professor fired, rather than critique the idea that within the academic institution they're teaching a lack of representation. So if that person gets fired, unless there's somebody actively ready to fall into that situation to actually improve the syllabus, here's the thing, it probably will get worse. So you've actively harmed representation. So the idea has completely fallen apart. Look at the outcomes and ask yourself if this is actually being done to an individual because you don't like their teaching style and you're just couching this behind the idea that you want representation, or are you actually following through on increasing the representation? Because here's a really good way of increasing representation. Take the class, befriend the lecturer, and give them sources.
Also, I would say, like, once you've taken the class and you've seen the reading material, or even studied the reading material yourself, like, ultimately, from a lived experience, who are the most likely to understand racial relations? Usually it's black people, because they deal with these kinds of things. That isn't to say that necessarily a white person can't understand these things, right? But it ultimately, that perspective doesn't come from white people, and it's kind of a secondhand perspective. And so really the goal would be, okay, well, I'll look at the material you provided, and if this contradicts with what a lot of black theorists in this particular theorists or historians or whichever the field was in this field is, then I think we should definitely discuss it and look into it. But I also find it kind of ironic that we have mostly white people talking.
I don't feel it's my place to have an opinion on this.
Yeah, it's ultimately it's not mine either. Like, I would say, like, read it, see what they have to say, but like ultimately it's not up to me to decide whether or not it's right or not.
So that specific thing is interesting because I've had some, minority people tell me that it's really sucky that white people so often just say, "I'm not going to talk about race shit," and it's such a hard line to balance. But anyway, on this specific issue, the professor sent back like, "Hey, there is all this stuff in the syllabus, right? And it should be more about like whether or not that's true and whether or not there's a real issue here."
Okay, so listen, Peter, I'm aware you need to head out, so I just want to throw it over to you for any final thoughts, any shilling you want to do, value extraction as you call it, and then there you go.
Well, I want to quickly say I kind of think that, just to quickly put in my 2 cents on this, I think that I don't necessarily think that academics are automatically good, but I don't think that they're automatically bad either. And I think that to some extent, this is somebody who maybe could have engaged with some of the actual content of because it seems to me as though the professor was actually trying to include a variety of voices, and it was at least like putting the effort into it, at least from the letter that I read. And I think that to some extent, the student could possibly go a little bit further before attempting to weaponize the social media post. I think that it's kind of just levying a certain perception against that person, which is, it's something that's backed up, you know, by a popular view of the idea that academics are stuffy and elitist. I don't think that I think that they're kind of playing into that trope, though, and I think that it probably is something that before doing this, they like, this seems to me like this should have been like a last avenue if nothing else worked. I think that if genuinely they had engaged with the material there, and it really was very like, I obviously have not engaged with all of the material that was listed by the professor in that letter, but if they had engaged with it and had also attempted to go through what you would do for normal channels for that type of a complaint and nothing came of it, it seems like it would make a little bit more sense to do this type of a thing rather, because if I'm totally honest, from the tone of the letter, that person seemed like they really wanted to have a diverse syllabus, and it just it seemed like it was a reaction as if they didn't want that, and that's kind of my contention there. I think there's a lot more that could have been done that I think would have been on peaceful and or friendly terms that may have had an effect long before doing something like this. Whereas, as was said by Zanzi, I think that this, if they do successfully get this gentleman fired, it's probably going to end up bad from both an individual perspective, as in they don't have somebody who can immediately take that place and immediately give a better syllabus. I would doubt it. That it would be a scramble. It would be a lot of work to find somebody like that. But at the same time, from a perspective of optics, if this becomes a big event, so to speak, and the right uses it and disseminates it along all of their various media channels, whether they be more traditional media or more social media, ultimately it ends up working out much worse because it reinforces that trope that I think that the person is actually actively engaging in sort of weaponizing against a professor for what reason? Like, honestly, like, I don't think that if somebody thought about this for more than 20 minutes, they would conclude that it will automatically get better by doing this. So I don't know what that person's motive was, or maybe they do think that it genuinely can just get better. But that's kind of my thought process on all of these things, and unfortunately, it's not. And this is kind of where I loop back around to my overarching point here, which is that institutionally speaking, a certain narrative has been disseminated, and I think that we have to engage with that narrative from the perspective of criticism. And I think on that, honestly, like, although a lot of the framing, Catherine, we probably disagree on, I sincerely doubt we disagree on that.
Yeah, you know, as we got through things, I see that we at least more or less are approaching things from like a deconstructive or like reappropriation lens, rather than just endorsing this idea on the face of it.
Yes. And I think that it's good that we were able to at least come to that before I have to leave, unfortunately.
And even better for me, I got some really good clippable moments to start the video out with.
Very good. So. Very good.
Okay.
I wish you great viral.
So Peter, before you go, for anyone that you know isn't aware of the Peter Coffin, do you want to just give yourself a quick outro and then, you know?
Yes, my name is Peter Coffin. I do video essays. I just released one called Cancel Culture today. I can be found on YouTube at youtube.com/Peter Coffin. Can be found on Twitter at Peter Coffin. And I really thank you, Chud, for having me on. I thank you, all of you, for talking with me, and I had a good time. Thank you.
Good talking to you again.
Yes, let's talk more, Jack.
Yeah, we should. Oh, by the way, Peter, real quick, can you say the line? You haven't said it yet, the stream. Attention
is currency in the marketplace of ideas.
Thank you.
Right? That's what you meant.
Oh, that's it. That's what we want.
Bye, guys. Thanks a lot.
See ya.
It's not a Coffin
So
appearance.
what was that about? So cancel culture is not real, right?
Yeah, so there's a load of bullshit. Yeah, it's right-wing bullshit. Never mention it.
I don't know
okay?
what that was.
If you mention it, you're not a true leftist. Okay, that's just a fact.
We were just
wait, you guys are joking, but Peter agreed to all that basically. So
okay, look.
Oh So it's real, right? It's I don't know what he was.
Right. Listen. The way I see it, okay. Like Jack Sane is saying he's too white to comment on this professor email thing, okay?
I do,
but no, look, I do, you know.
He's pretty white.
Yeah, you are, you know. What's the meme? I don't know if I want to do the meme actually, because Destiny obviously now is actually cancelled. So, you know, I don't care, didn't ask, plus you're white. You must have been familiar with that one.
Yeah, I don't know Twitch culture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't do debate bro. Debate bro culture is its own thing.
Sorry. Yeah, that went down like a lead balloon then. Look, sorry.
I might have a little bit more to say on the university idea. I mentioned in my introduction that I run a Facebook group for fiction writers that has like 800 members or something like that. It's me and my best friend manage it together. It was her idea, and she brought me onto it. And so the whole purpose of the group is to write fiction with minority characters, accurately done by people not of the minority, right? It doesn't serve us if we only include trans characters in stories written by trans people. It doesn't suit us if we only have black characters in stories only written by black people, right? And so on for various other minorities. And so the goal of the writing group is to really help us accurately depict people of other minorities in a way that's sensitive to the underlying our society, basically. So I don't think that this it is suspect that this professor included only white people to speak or to have their books on the syllabus. It's incredibly suspect, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the material is bad. That being said, I think that he should have recognized that when he was making his syllabus and understand that. It doesn't mean you can't include white speakers, right, or white books that talk about the subject, but you really have to understand that in particular when talking about this subject, this is where we get into kind of cultural appropriation. If you're going to say, well, we're going to pull all these white people talking about subjects that have been built upon as ideas by black people in the past, you're giving them not only academic but financial support, as opposed to the black people who originally came up with and worked on these ideas. And so ultimately, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily a marker of bad intent, but I think that the professor was probably a little bit misled in his construction of his syllabus. Ultimately, the critique of that syllabus I can't make because I'm not there. I don't have the expertise. I can't critique it.
So just like a factual
sorry,
claim to fix. Sorry. Like 3 of the authors were POC.
Okay.
Okay, no,
you were going to say
that's fine. No, sorry, that was fine. No, that's correct. Three of us were. What I want to do, Dr. K, I will get to you. Okay, give me a couple of minutes. But Mabase, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Did you know what I'm talking about with this college professor drama and whatnot? Yeah.
I just said to go ahead and look into it. Yeah, there are no black people on the thing. I don't know, dude. One thing I do contend with is the idea, including other POCs means that we don't have a problem. We're talking about black people. I am not other types of POCs, okay? And just you can be anti-black and absolutely love you some Asians, okay? Stop doing this. People aren't not when I say someone's racist, to me, don't bring up their fucking Pakistani friend. That has nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with the situation. Please stop doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
As for this individual situation, I could see calling it out, yo, it's a little weird that we're talking some racial stuff or whatever, and you don't have any black people, right? Some of the foundational theorists that we have around race are black people, right? Fucking W.B. Du Bois comes to mind, right? And other blacks, sociologists and Marxist thinkers, etc. It seems kind of weird that you would just completely skip over those people, right? That's a little weird, but I don't know if you have to be fired for it.
Mabase, sorry, just to make a quick point, the actual course, my understanding it was queer theory. That was the course, and the contention was Yeah.
And you're not going to include any black voices in that at all.
Oh no,
That's-
dude!
that's
We basically architect the whole culture.
Yeah.
Well, not
So-
black trans women, but
Mhm.
like, dude,
Yeah.
are you serious?
So that's not untrue, but it is true that we should look at the text of whatever these books are and say that they're lacking, right? It's very possible that because there aren't any black voices, that they are lacking. But I don't know the text, and I can't speak to that.
And that's why, like, I say that it makes me look at the professor with suspicion, but not outright contempt, right? Like, I don't know. Like, is he going to handle this subject with? Can I trust that he's picked voices that will speak properly on that matter? Like, are they going to mention Marsha P. Johnson? Are they going to mention any of the other black, gay, or trans rights activists that were involved in this? Because they were definitely involved. And not only that, but when you have race and queerness intersect like that with the AIDS epidemic, like, you're dealing with a really, really huge blind spot here.
Sure, and just again to clarify, just to clarify again, like, it's possible that me as a white person could read all sorts of black theory and bring it together into one book that covers it really usefully for a class. And
it's possible.
Yeah,
it's just suspect. That's all I say. Like, it's
definitely that's
question
my
about
thing.
it.
Is like you can like call that out or whatever, but like, I don't know, maybe like give it a shot or whatever, or reach out to somebody, see if they've ever read any of these authors and see how they tend to handle it.
I agree.
Okay, right. We're getting close there. We've got another hour left. What I want to do, obviously, if anyone needs to leave, that's fine. You can do, but hopefully you're all enjoying yourselves. Right, Dr. K, you've just joined us. What I'd like to hear from you, actually, if you've got any thoughts on what's being discussed, feel free to chip in. But also, I just want to hear your broader perspective on cancel culture. We'll see if there's agreement or disagreement, and then I've got a few other things to focus the conversation. So, Dr. K, over to you. Go ahead.
All right, so I have, I heard Peter say his catchphrase right there at the end. I have one that I've been pioneering, right? And I keep hammering it home to anyone who will listen, right? And that's that America is a country built to destroy left-wing movements. There is most certainly a cancel culture in existence, but it is mainly aimed at I would argue, the American left. Like, if you express, views that are too far to the left. I mean, hell, we might even be seeing this right now in the Massachusetts little election thing with Ed Markey, who I think he basically moved his position a little bit leftwards, right? And he might, lose his position over that to, some Kennedy fail son. So, like, there is a cancel culture, and like, in that context, yes, it's certainly a thing that exists, and it's like, it's not something new. If you break a ton of social norms, yeah, you're going to be ostracized. I don't think that, I generally think, like, take a hands-off approach, like let people know about that person's actions, but like, you don't need to make an aggressive campaign out of it most of the time. The social ostracization that they will get as a result of it, hopefully, will do its job. I mean, I think arguing about cancel culture is a lot of wasted breath over something that is going to happen whether we want it to or not.
Mm-hmm. And what you say about it being attack on the left, like, it's totally true in that, like, even it's built into the term itself. Like, it's only, even though if we were to like use it on the right, there'd be plenty of instances of like the kinds of behavior they're describing being used by them, but that's never the way that it's prescribed. Well, right? It's like built into the use of the term.
To even tie it into the other conversation, right, with academia, right, is during the height of McCarthyism, it was a regular thing to, like, there was like a whole thing about there was like a list of professors and university staff that were presumed to be, communists, and they were basically blackballed university system. And it's like that, if you that's going to have repercussions down the line. and yeah, it can still be impacting. Excuse me. Academic material that we're seeing. That said, on the professor thing, I think that student acted really out of line. That's like crazy amounts of social faux pas you have there. If you have a professor, or if you have a problem with a professor's syllabus, right, you don't post it on social media. You don't call someone out for that. You go to their office and talk to them first, which it doesn't seem the student did. Because, they hadn't even had a first day of class yet.
They emailed, but that was about it, I believe.
Exactly. It's like, meet with them in person and discuss it before you make a social media campaign out of it.
Yeah.
This too, when we're kind of talking about the kind of competitive aspect of kind of cancel culture and whatnot, where I've seen this kind of behavior within me being the furthest left member of my Facebook group, more or less. It's been really frustrating because I've really had to push back on this tendency within my group and within all that stuff to like immediately jump to these sorts of conclusions, right? There seems to be this kind of desire to come out morally ahead of each other, and it's like a moral competition that I really think is toxic to the whole conversation as a whole, because when people start making moralization arguments about it, and particularly when white people start jumping into conversations about race, or straight people start jumping into conversations about other things, what I've seen is, I mentioned cultural appropriation earlier, but in my group we've had a huge problem with white people assuming they understand what cultural appropriation is, and using it as a way to kind of dunk on each other, but not actually listening to what the black people in the group have to say about what cultural appropriation is, right? Not actually listening. I had a situation just recently. I made a joke about J.K. Rowling, how when I was like early egg trans just coming out, I had this fantasy of this kid going to Hogwarts and getting super into transfiguration so she could develop her own like transition magic thing, right? And then not to have J.K. Rowling come out later as being specifically against that thing, I found incredibly ironic. Right? And I posted that just like a joke, but I all of a sudden had a bunch of cis people coming in and saying, well, I understand what she's talking about. And it's like they think they understand all of this stuff. And then I have other cis people or other people that are jumping in to say, oh, well, we should call transphobic people transphobic. It's like, no, but you don't understand the purpose of this group. Like the whole, you join this group to learn about these things. And if we just jump on people that are expressing privilege, if we just jump on people who are doing microaggressions, and this is the same kind of conversation we're having with workplaces. If you jump on these people before they get the chance to listen to the arguments and listen to what you have to say, then they're just going to not listen to you. Right? Sorry, go on. Oh, sorry. You go, and then I'll finish.
I was going to say, like, to link these two things together, like that, to speak exactly to Dr. K's point about how that there is a certain very effective framing that the right doesn't hear, is that points 6 and 7 from Umberto Eco's 14 Points of Fascism are appeal to social frustration of the middle class, and then to orientate around an obsession with a plot, which is exactly what cancel culture serves for them, because it's the perspective that this is the unclothed masses trying to suppress free speech. That's the way they frame it. But to speak into the like, this is like the last take I have on the education of the professor thing. The thing that's important to mention is I'm going to bring Gramsci up again, because it actually ties into a lot of the issues, even in what Miss Abby was talking about earlier, where that you should have all of these other theorists kind of involved because they like laid the groundwork. One of the things that Gramsci identified within cultural hegemony is that the ruling class will dictate what is considered the appropriate common sense, and then what ends up happening is you end up with a class of people that get held outside of the norm, that they become known as the subaltern class. That term ended up being used in critical theory, and especially like decolonial theory, to describe the set of people who kind of like, they exist, but they're not really allowed to exist in the cultural identity of things. And with how these cultures develop intellectuals, the intellectuals we see in academia are the ruling class intellectual, they're traditional intellectuals. We're not going to find these theorists in these areas. We're going to find them in what are called organic intellectuals, where they're people that will organically emerge out of their areas who've collected wisdom. So from this specific institute, from the specific situation where you have one student talking about one class changing one syllabus, that can affect maybe 150 students. Whereas if you had all of those 150 students go and actually reach into communities, listen to these perspectives from these organic intellectuals, if one or two of them go on to become a lecturer, now imagine if every student in every class does this. The point is to fundamentally change the structure of societies tomorrow, the way they go, rather than focusing on individual changes within structures that are actively trying to keep people out. The point is to change it. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to actually go to the source and talk and learn from those people. Yeah.
So yeah, and Zan just mentioned like just one student in something unrelated, but what the student ought to have done if the course syllabus is actually bad is go talk to all the other students in this course, bring up the same issue, and have them also come with you to address the professor, and then bring that above his head to the whatever the term is there. But like, actually, instead of going off onto social media for like woke points, actually like organize and build a real direct movement to get that specific thing changed, rather than this person fired. And just going back to something Dr. K said that I think was just a throwaway joke, even, is like the idea that we shouldn't be talking about cancel culture. It's extremely important to talk about and deconstruct these terms that the right uses, and even more importantly, model and explain the correct way to talk about these issues. Talk about how you don't call someone a transphobe, you educate someone on what they're doing that is transphobic. You don't just bring up microaggressions to right-wingers, you point out microaggressions to your left-wing friends because you know that they'll take that and want to change their behavior and learn from it, and they'll appreciate you pointing out the issue.
Okay, so sorry, Dr. K. Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Well, see, like, Zan, I respect what you're saying, but when you're talking about, marginal academic fields, ones that generally aren't, taken quote unquote as seriously, those tend to be staffed by your organic intellectuals in the institution. That's why those fields aren't given the same, respect that other fields are. Right. And so I would say, in the case of queer studies, I may have just had good experiences, but it tends to be the case that the people who teach these classes, fucking know what they're talking about. And so, I would urge anyone who's, listening to Chud's stream, if something on the professor's syllabus, looks sus, don't drop the class, wait, if, after like 3 weeks, obviously it's still bad, but like, don't drop the class preemptively. Like, go to the first few sessions and actually see how the professor teaches and how they interact with you, because I promise you, when you are in person or, in front of a webcam, during a Zoom class meeting or whatever, I guarantee you that's going to be a lot different than how it is like in an email, right? And you're going to get a much better read for what this kind of person is, and if they're going to be actually representative of your needs, right? Like, it's so fucking unprofessional to do that. I cannot believe that there are people trying to justify that behavior. No, not anyone on this panel, just like people I've seen, in the cyberspace.
Yeah, no, I actually completely agree with you. Apologies if I gave the impression that I wanted them to drop the class. No, I think they should keep the class. Because I'm taking philosophy and sociology in what's like 3 weeks college is soon. When you your syllabus is going to be like a fraction of your learning. You're going to be reading sources from outside of your syllabus. Any good student to be doing this. The point I'm getting at is understanding that because of the way institutions get formed, the academic institution is mirrored like 4 generations back of the society that built it. The American academic system is built off of the corpse of white nationalism. So you're not really going to get accurate representation within there. So don't look for it within the academic system. Go look outside of it to supplement your learning. That's the point I'm getting at. Where reach outside of academia and look for sources that are not being popularized within your academic circles. That's kind of what I'm getting at, supplement your learning by reaching out to those organic intellectuals.
Yeah, that is the behavior of any good student and anybody who's showing good intellectual rigor is trying to find a myriad of places to draw knowledge from and not just grounded in one area.
Well, look, here's like a little something I want to throw in on top of this. Okay, so I think one thing that we miss sometimes is things stacking on top of each other. So, for example, this person shared this email on social media, said, "Oh, look at this email from a professor," tagged their fucking college, which was kind of funny, but in any case, they did all this stuff.
They did that. Oh, jeez, that's even worse.
And they get the dean involved, all this stuff, right? Which I think we kind of broadly agree maybe isn't the best way to go about it. But then what happens from there is people, it gets some traction, people like it, people share it, but then it gets to the point where the detractors, the people that disagree, find it, and then they start kind of, I call it dogpiling, right? They start quote tweeting and getting in the comments and replying. Like Vosh covered it on stream. I spoke about it on stream as well. But obviously Vosh has got thousands of people that are watching, and it's like, at what point does that backlash then itself become an example of call out cultural dogpiling? Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think that because Peter kind of brought that up, and I don't mean to argue against Peter when they're not here, but fuck Peter. It was no, it was they were saying about optics and about how theoretically I think this situation could be bad optics. I would push back against that idea to the extent that I think that it's a totally losing battle to ever be the second this thing happened. This can't be oh, this is bad optics for the left, because now there's a dozen, thousands of other people that are on the left who are calling this out as a bad thing that shouldn't have been done. Doesn't everyone on this panel agree that it was not, at the very least, not the right way to go about that, right? Mm-hmm. And yet this is kind of being put upon us as well, this is bad optics, right? And I don't know if that was what Peter necessarily meant. It was just an incidental point that they made. But I think that is something that I hear a lot. I think I did see someone in chat say the exact same thing pretty much. It's this being bad optics. I think that's something that we definitely would need to push back against, this notion of this is more examples of this leftist cancel culture and it's bad optics for us. It's if we engage in that kind of conversation, you can never get anywhere, because there's always going to be one person who does something stupid.
Right. You especially, you don't see the right coming out and that one white kid who yelled in the face of an Aboriginal drummer or whatever, right? They didn't come out and say, "Oh, this is really bad optics for the right." Seating that a random student is part of the left at all, it's not really a good way to go about the conversation, because this isn't an intellectual in any particular capacity. Dr. K.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's 2020, baby. Optics is dead. Facts dead. People you got deep fake shit. You got people like Andy and Yo. They're gonna find shit even if you're fucking perfect behavior from everyone. They're still gonna find shit. They don't fucking care. They called Joe Biden a fucking socialist. It doesn't. Optics is fucking dead.
I kind of disagree with this because sure, people can make up stuff, but a clip of you or a video or a screen cap of you actually doing something really terrible can be a lot more powerful than some vague lies.
Well, exactly.
May,
Obviously,
pick up
don't
some people,
be terrible, but
I could say I could
sort
say
of, like,
you've done one second,
rephrase,
please.
maybe?
I could say you did something terrible on Twitter, and maybe some people would believe me. But if I had a screenshot or a video of you doing something terrible, then that obviously people are going to get on board a lot quicker with that, right? I mean, sure, I'm not like a huge media apparatus like establishment, but you get the idea, right?
I think Dr. K's essential point in there is that, like, no matter what you do, like, you can't literally police everyone, right? They're gonna find something somewhere somehow, right? And anyone who seems to vaguely align with our ideology in any way is gonna be pinned to us and say, like, oh, look what the loony left is up to again, right? Like this kid, for all we know, this could be a fucking Biden voter, but somehow because they complain about the lack of black representation in the syllabus, is now a fucking far left commie who's trying to, I don't know, take your guns or whatever.
You say Biden voter, but Biden and Kamala Harris are far left commies. What are you talking about?
You know, as someone who had her as DA of my state, fucking seeing her thrive, it burns me deep down in here in the indigestion tube.
I think that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The rephrasing I wanted to do is just that it's not that optics are dead, it's that narrative is king in 2020. And like, you shouldn't give up on performing your optics as well as you can. It's just you have to know narrative is going to take over if you can.
Yeah, don't go out of your way to be a dipshit, but like, you know, they're going to frame you as a dipshit whether you do or you don't. So just keep
and also
that in mind.
something that's relevant to both the optics conversation and like this cancel culture discussion is that it is so situational, right? Like, good optics for one group of people could be bad optics for another group, and you know, whatever. It was like I have my own. I know this is tangential if I just rant about optics, but you know, it was like the whole dirtbag woke skulls drama. Where it was like, is this good optics for the left? Is this good optics for the left? Well, it depends who you're trying to appeal to, right? If you want to appeal to like one group of people, they're going to want something different.
That's
exactly as an avowed Pepsi leftist.
Oh my god! Can I just? Sorry, I just want to say, like, you know, Jack, that Pepsi Coke leftist thing, I still think about that today. That was a fucking good meme, okay? And to be honest, like, you know, it was a meme, but it perfectly summed up what was happening. The commodification of, like, leftist content to the degree where you're having, like, an Xbox versus PS4 fucking argument over leftism. Like, what the fuck are we doing?
The fandomization of the left.
But also in its own way valid, because it's like you have these political ideas and you want to just kind of get into people's brains. It's the reason that, like, my channel, I talk about it for the, like, often I'll use like media, like popular media, right? It's like one way or another, you want to get these ideas into people's brains, and you're going to want to do that like a bunch of different ways. And the only reason that like the conversation needs to come up is when you're like, is the way you're doing this fundamentally contradictory to the beliefs that you're trying to instill? I think that's where it gets interesting. But otherwise, it's just like, fandom wars bullshit. I know this is kind of unrelated to cancel culture. But...
Well, so there's oh, sure, goes on.
Oh, sorry, I like exactly to that point, because like it's Catherine. I fundamentally agree with the essence of your point, which is cancel culture. We need to get away from that, but we should go to where the conversation is. If someone's talking about cancel culture, get involved in the conversation and quickly try to like undermine the salience of the term to introduce the more nuance. And like part of where that comes from me is the idea that like you have like where the like I said earlier about an hour ago, like we lost the naming rights to this battle, but there's still a battle going on. Like where that front line is drawn, you either go to that front line and engage them, or you concede ground. And if you concede ground over the naming rights, we don't know what else we've lost.
Yeah,
so, kind of like so the point that I'd say is almost like to echo every good socialist organization, like go to where the people are, not where you want them to be.
Because I actually think the left is... Sorry, I'm just going to do this one last point. But like we briefly brought up political correctness, and I think that it definitely plays a role here. Because I think the left, broadly speaking, actually did a pretty good job undermining the notion of political correctness to the point where the right couldn't really say it without it seeming like this very like archaic, like backwards belief that like, oh, political correctness has gone mad. In particular, like, yes, in some circles that's still used, but I think that we did a good job undermining it, and I think we could do the same with cancel culture to a great extent.
In particular, pretty heavily used.
It's pretty good.
It seems like it's pretty disconnected at this point, right? Like most people who still engage in that kind of rhetoric tend to like kind of get shit on and get okay boomered ratioed.
Yeah. No, well,
Yeah, but
that's
that's
what I'm
like
saying. It's
Twitter.
the
I think-
boomers who are still
I think
using it.
you have to like keep in mind like newspaper boomers are like 5 years behind discourse. So they're like on Jordan Peterson, like Bill 16 levels of discourse, and like getting shit on Twitter like doesn't affect them because they don't even go on Twitter. But I understand what you're getting
One
at.
thing
yes.
that I wanted to talk about in terms of. Sorry, go on.
So I was going to say, Cara, I know you mentioned, 5 minutes ago you need to leave at some point. I just want to check in with you.
Yeah.
What's the deal?
I just wanted to quickly comment about how we were able to counteract the political correctness narrative with recognizing you don't want to be you just want to be able to say whatever you want without any accountability now. Like that was a really good way of framing it that really helped people that were kind of on the fence understand what it was, right? But yeah, no, I more or less like I think it's been a fairly productive discussion. I think I don't have much else to say other than that. Yeah, I was away for the night, so I should go and see my partner and all that stuff. And
no
time with
worries.
them.
Thanks for coming back for the conversation. Before you go, can you just give yourself like a little shill where people can find you and your content?
Yeah, I'm not as active as I like to be. I suffer from the plague of structurelessness. So I do have a YouTube channel. I've got some interesting stuff on there. I'm still figuring out what I'm doing with it. I don't know what my format is yet. I've been experimenting with a lot of different things. I've got, if you want to see what I kind of think of a lot of things, I have a playlist of Lord of the Rings, breaking down Lord of the Rings from a leftist perspective. And what I think that his ideas could teach us about struggle and whatnot. In particular, it's called Power and Struggle. The first part's about power, the second part's about struggle. So if you want to see the kind of stuff that I like to make, definitely go and take a look at that. My channel is Transnational, exactly how it's spelled on next to my name there.
Okay, cool, good stuff. Yeah, like I say, thanks for swinging by, and speak to you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, nice to
All right.
Thanks for hanging out.
All right. I also need to jump out of here. Okay.
No worries.
I love. All right. I love all of you guys. Twitch.tv is that's my website. My website also on YouTube, and my website YT on Twitter. And what's up? Follow me. Let's meme. Let's do stuff.
Good stuff. Thanks for swinging by.
Nice to meet you.
And
all right.
Nice to meet
you guys. Nice to meet everyone. All right. Jack, keep doing what you do. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, listen. I just want to. I guess we can spend the last 30 minutes or so just kind of memeing on right wingers, and I'll open it up by saying this. Right, I don't give a single. The reason I didn't get any right wingers for this panel is because they don't like me, because normally I just take the piss out of them. And number two, the other reason is because their opinions on cancel culture are totally fucking worthless. It's ridiculous, right? I read an article by Ricky Gervais, right, and he suggested that someone pointing out to him that Winston Churchill was a white supremacist was like an example of cancel culture, right? And it's like, what the fuck?
That's what I mean by boomers being 5 years behind the discourse.
Not to
The
engage
man
in
whose
like
career was
joke.
built on cancelling Hitler.
Oh God. And like obviously you shouldn't take anyone who has been canceled at face value on the topic. It's just silly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have been cancelled repeatedly, and I would like you to take my word as law. So.
Yeah, but it would be foolish of anyone to do that, Jack. They should see that everyone else on the panel happened to agree with you on this panel, and therefore you made good arguments, right? You shouldn't. Yeah.
But
because
uncancelled are just bad.
There's so many comedians specifically that go around whining about like, oh, no one can make a joke anymore, as if that's the issue, when the issue is that you can't make bigoted jokes and have people accept that. You can still make extremely edgy jokes as long as they aren't bigoted themselves. You can even straight up use slurs in your jokes as long as the joke isn't bigoted. And they don't understand that because they don't understand the difference between a joke that targets a minority and a joke that has it somewhere.
Dr. K, go ahead.
I mean, like, if they want to abide by the free market principles, it's like, well, the audience tastes have shifted over the years. So like, fucking adapt your humor and go where the audience is instead of expecting them to come back to you and your jokes that have, like, were bigoted in the 90s and are now just straight up unacceptable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's always these old comedians who've had a career for X long and like, oh, now no one likes my comedy anymore. Get a fucking new routine.
Okay. Like Chud says, right-wingers' opinion on this is worthless, right? And then he brings up, the heavyweight intellectual font of wisdom that is Ricky Gervais. And it's like, oh, man. Is that the best they got? Is that the best?
Yeah. I mean, look, the thing is, Ricky Gervais is put to the forefront of a conversation as someone that, and it's people like that with those sorts of people. So honestly, that's the level of discourse the right are at when it comes to cancel culture. They don't give a fuck about... Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
No, yeah, because I have a personal example of this, whereas I think that the great benefit the left has is that we have kind of the ability to be remotely analytical about the notion of cancel culture. Like, we can break it down and try and deconstruct what it means and everything. Whereas I feel like with the riot, it's like that's inherently an attack on cancel culture. Like, it's the same as with, like, when they talk about censorship, they talk about it as this very broad thing. And then suddenly you, like, go, well... Technically, like, the company chose to change this thing. Like, there wasn't anyone telling them they had to do that. And now it's like, oh, well, social pressure still counts as censorship. And so, it all breaks that down. The personal example I have is that a couple years ago now, I did a video about Friends and how it might not have aged very well. And I'm not that big a fan of that video nowadays, but it still gets views for some reason. And a lot of people were still commenting going like, oh, you're trying to cancel Friends. And I repeatedly made jokes in the video about the fact that I'm not trying to do that. The point was to analyze the fact that Friends was a reproduction of its time, the mainstream culture of its era, and so any problematic elements of the culture at the time would be reproduced in Friends. Whereas when you compare that to maybe something like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I did in that video, which was specifically critiquing the mainstreams of culture in a lot of ways. And so when you look back at it, there's actually a lot of progressive ideas in that show. And I think that's interesting in and of itself. And that's an analytical thing. I'm not trying to cancel Friends, And that's something the right can't do. They can't analyze that shit. Well, they just have to go, nope, that's cancellation.
Right.
No, because the way...
That seems to be the big difference between most of the right, and the reason we bring up fucking Ricky Gervais in anything about an intellectual argument is because they don't do deep intellectual dives on things. Generally speaking, they generally don't bring any nuance to any topic, and it's very frustrating. And even when you get individual smaller creators on the right who you could build a relationship with, it's hard to get them out of that mind space where they're just regurgitating talking points, because it's all about fucking talking points and buzzword.
Yeah, because the way when I look at the right wing and the way they adapt into a lot of these ideas, the way I sometimes describe it is that it's a very immature indulgence in Dionysian thinking, where they're very attached to how they feel in that moment about that specific thing. Because speaking to Dr. K and Catherine's conversation about kind of the people wanting to tell edgy jokes, I used to be involved in amateur comedy in Ireland. I ran a comedy club and I got invited to different universities just to talk to comedians. One of the questions I'd routinely get asked is, how do I tell edgy jokes? And my god honest answer to them was, why do you want to? If you're asking that question, you probably shouldn't be telling them.
But I do want very quickly point to Jimmy Carr or fucking Anthony Jeselnik. Or there are comedians who are right on the edge all the time without being problematic.
Bo Burnham is a good example of somebody who plays with that edge very, very well.
Dr. K?
Well, so here's the real thing, right? And I don't know the situation, Zahn and Chud in the UK, but as the American right, at least, is getting increasingly fascistic, right? There's this greater and greater disdain for, intellectuals. That's just a fucking hallmark of what you need to do to make fascism work. And so, it sounds a little self-masturbatory to say this, but there's just no, you're fucking bleeding out intellectuals on the right. There's fucking none of them anymore, essentially. And so, yeah, of course, you aren't you're just not going to get, any good analysis out of it. But that's the thing, right? Is so what do you seek out from there, right? And another trait of fascist behavior is the aesthetic, the aesthetifying, you know what I mean, of politics, right? And so what do? You start bringing in people who are not experts in, analytical frameworks, but instead people who are very good at creating, aesthetics. So you bring in entertainers as a basically a substitution for your intellectual group.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think it's not so much that there isn't any right-wing intellectuals, because there is, but it's more like the takes is so unnuanced that people like Ricky Gervais can fill that gap by just saying, "Oh, look at how bad cancel culture is," and that's like so much more powerful than like some dude in a suit with glasses like reading from a textbook or some shit, right? Or like speaking in a completely unrelatable way to the average person.
Yeah, and just to modify what Dr. K was saying, I disagree very slightly, but not at all when you really think about it. There is actually an enormous amount of analysis within the right wing. It's just all being funneled into conspiracy.
Okay, that's an interesting thought.
That's true.
And when there are people, who are like genuinely smart, like analytical on the right, they get funneled into think tanks for corporatization.
True.
All right, I need to go
the
for
right
a
wing
second.
fundamentally co-ops and
yeah,
the desire
or they notice that they can cash out and like be intellectually bankrupt to a public and make huge amounts of money, and they choose to do that. Or sometimes they become like ANCAPs, or people who aren't as like socially right wing, but they use all their logic to build up like a fucking economically right wing standpoint that can make more sense than the normal sort of right wing rhetoric, especially in America.
I think broadly, bringing it back to like cancel culture discussion, well, one thing that's like relevant to that is that, with this anti-intellectual bent that's kind of been slowly taking over, the left can't really control that because we don't really have state or corporate influence. So I get how we do need to play their game to some respect. Like, yeah, a lot of big leftist thinkers nowadays are also entertainers, right? Like, if there is like a lot of left-wing voices, it is rarely in academia nowadays. And so I get why, in some respects, we do need to play that game also. So it's not just like the right is just stupid entertainers and the left is where all the smart intellectuals are. We need to also play to their field as well.
No, of course. Like I'm not at all an intellectual, but I bring so much more like nuance and attempts towards making profound statements to any content I make than fucking Peter Crowder or Steven Crowder, actually. Or the quartering is actually just like a depressed alcoholic, it seems, and I'd rather not shit on him.
God,
he's done horrible things to horrible people, but pissing in your basement while on stream and like talking about it, it's so sad.
I watched that and I was like, I watched it live on stream thinking, oh yeah, let's mock the quartering for this, and then it was just tragic and I was like, oh my god, this is actually fucking like I don't know if I felt sympathy for him, like I'm a bit of a cruel motherfucker, so I did kind of laugh a little bit, but it's like, yeah, fuck me, like God. And I think the thing is like, look, I don't want to do the whole, being a right-wing content creator is easy, because obviously there's some work involved, but it does seem like they can literally just start a video up about fucking the size of anime titties, complain about it for 15 minutes, and that's it. There's the content done,
I think that the left is a lot more critical. I will say that, like, as a leftist video maker myself, I'm a lot more conscious of making sure that all of my language is as clear as I can make it. Whereas I feel like whenever I watch like a conservative creator, it's like they'll say shit and it's like, wait, that completely contradicts, and no one in the audience is calling it out. It's
like, that's a big disconnect between the two sides, is that as a leftist content creator that your audience is going to be critical of what you say, and it's like the opposite on the right. People are very much like going to take whate's being said and try to find the way to defend it and make it make sense.
I think that's what creates the left eats itself image, is like the fact that the left is very critical of one another. On my end, I'm fine with the left being critical with one another. It's like, I remember, so like I've had disagreements with Vorsh in our like various presentational styles. And the thing that I've been trying to get to there is that I can have disagreements with him on certain things, and I just hate it when there's just someone in the replies, or a bunch of people in the replies often will be like, oh, is there beef now? Oh, is this the left eating itself again? It's like, no, you need to have a space where you can be highly critical of one another without it being like, wow, you're trying to cancel them. You know?
And no, I think it's a really useful nuance that I was able to bring up and other people brought up in this conversation about how we have to talk to our audiences insofar as we have them, and like explain to people more how to go about being critical of ideas and not people, and how to, like, if you're doing a hate mob to cancel people, you shouldn't be trying to destroy their lives, right? That should never be the goal. If anyone ever becomes a fan of mine, I don't want to destroy anyone's lives unless they are literally the ruler of a country, and even then, that's not the goal. It's just practical at that point.
Well, the way I like to think about it, and the way I try to say it, is that everything I say, I'm representing my ideas. They're not mine. They never belong to me. I'm regurgitating much smarter people than me, and my goal is to basically try to present other ideas in a coherent way that can be understood to people who haven't spent 3 or 4 years reading a thick academic tome. If you disagree with my ideas, it really has nothing to do with me. It's literally, it's the essence of a dialectic. It's arguing in good faith to achieve truth. It has nothing to do with the person doing the arguing.
Right, and this is so true about, like, I'm not bringing out my own ideas so often because I'm using the fact that I can get onto a debate panel and be really entertaining, and that, like, I have some, like, social charisma that makes people interested in listening to me, and I use that to platform ideas from people I watch who I know are, like, more educated than me on things, like, especially, like, disability issues, which is something that's, like, really I'm passionate about, but I'm not able to go and do the deep reading. And so I consume other content creators, and then I repackage that into spaces that those content creators don't or can't go. And like that's what most of what we're doing is.
Yeah, and just a PSA for anyone who's like cishet white, who's desperately trying to wonder how do you get around the idea of like being told that like you can't speak. Literally abandon the idea that your perspective, your subjective point of view actually doesn't really mean that much, because you're inundated with a kind of like hegemonic identity or ideology that you literally can't see how alienated people are in society. So actively listen to minorities and then reiterate their points to other people. That's the point of it.
Yeah. Like the odds are that you, as this like theoretical hetero cis white guy, unless you are personally rich, you are part of the oppressed class, and you are part of the thing that we're trying to build on the left. And the way to be part of it isn't to jump up in front of everyone and say like, hey, wait a second, I have a question. I'm going to make it all about me and my questions right now. When there's all this content out there, and there's like more appropriate ways to get that information. And like, just because you feel uncomfortable, like that can matter for you in your life, but it's not the most important thing all the fucking time.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I agree. I think for me, the biggest thing in this conversation is you know, we so often like individualize things. Like for example, does everyone know about the Adele thing? Like wearing.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I've heard about it, but I know nothing about it.
So, Jack, do you want to explain? Maybe you can give a good explanation.
I don't know enough about the situation.
Okay, I know a little bit.
God's sake.
So basically, Adele went to a kind of celebratory like event in, I believe, Notting Hill, which is celebrating kind of Jamaican tradition, Jamaican culture. And she went there with a bra with a Jamaican flag and Jamaican style hair, but she's like not Jamaican. So people were upset. And some people were like very angry, and some people were just kind of like trying to educate her or genuinely concerned. And this was like an example of like cancel culture or whatever.
Yeah, next time do your own research, Chud. Thank you.
Okay, but look, here's the thing, right? So for me, there's two things happening there. So there's a systemic issue, and as far as I can tell, obviously I'm as white as they fucking come, right? As far as I can tell, the issue is certain types of hairstyles have got like a historical relevance, and on top of that, they've meant that black people have been discriminated against, right? So someone wears dreadlocks to work, they're told you can't wear them because they're dirty and unclean and whatever, and obviously like that's disgusting and needs to change, right? But what happens is like you'll have a white girl wear their hair in a hairstyle that's considered not okay for white people to have. Normally in America, that tends to be the case in terms of like, it's very focused on American cultural understanding of these things, right? But then everyone will go full ham on this person. And it's like, even if the person decided to change their hairstyle, you still remain with this systemic issue of black people are discriminated against potentially because of their hairstyle, right? And it's like, why do lefties or alleged lefties engage in this individual kind of moralizing and shaming when that is going to do literally nothing to solve the broader systemic issue, right? That's the issue I take sometimes. I don't know. What do you think?
So Chud, like you answered your own question there when you clarified from lefties to alleged lefties, right?
Yeah, sure.
This is almost entirely, I would imagine, a problem of people who do not actually understand like leftist theory. And right, it's the like pop culture feminism problem or whatever, when people say things like kill all men, and that becomes a narrative for some reason, when like a proper understanding of feminism includes men's liberation, which we've had to fucking rename 50 times because men's rights activists are misogynist assholes, by the way. But feminism includes improving the lot of men, fundamentally. Just to be clear.
I think, Chud, you made a really good point on your stream when you covered it, and that was the why do we need to like bring down this individual for like a fucking hairstyle when really the issue is like the systemic stuff, and we should be instead like eliminating like the prejudice that black people face, you know, in like work hiring, education, all that kind of thing when they have these hairstyles.
I think that's an instance of us kind of playing by the rights game, where we kind of like suddenly include presumably a lot of liberal thinkers in with the left, specifically when it's like, this is cultural appropriation. Like, that very much could be the case with a lot of the people that were cancelling Adele there. Not that anyone will give a shit about any of this 2 days from now.
True.
You know, it's like...
Like it sounds like a fundamentally liberal take, and like we as leftists we can see that, and that's why I think it's so important to like try to educate people on what the actual nuance is in a catchy way somehow, and like fight the fucking liberal brainworms.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a ideological perspective until suddenly the right wants it to be an identity camp, and then we just immediately see the ground and go, yeah, it's an identity camp. It's just the left is anyone who's kind of like a little bit woke. You know, it's a tricky game.
My perspective on this can be summed up beautifully in a sentence that I derived during the Hillary Clinton campaign, which is, why are we focusing on glass ceilings when the glass floor has never been lower? How does identifying this individual case of appropriation fundamentally change the lives of the ordinary people who have to actually deal with this appropriation? It's like society's appropriate, individuals don't, societies do. For me, that's just, I'm obsessed with systems, because like I get very confusing for me, because like here's one thing that I noticed, like I'm living in Ireland, for anyone who didn't know because of the accent. There was a black girl in, I think it was Michigan, and she started Irish dancing, and she started appearing in competitions and things, and there were Irish people who accused her of cultural appropriation, and like I come from an Irish dancing family, and I'm kind of like, where has anything she's done culturally appropriated? Because I think we kind of fundamentally miss the point of what appropriation is in these situations, where it's when you co-opt something and divorce it from its cultural context. Everything she's doing, she's dancing.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like
Right,
she's
right.
dressed as a leprechaun and holding
Yeah.
a potato and doing the whole like stereotype. Like,
Like, sorry for being horribly reductive there, but
Sure.
she's dancing and she's enjoying a bit of culture that was derived in this island. She hasn't appropriated the damn thing.
To just bring it back to like an American audience, like Eminem isn't the one appropriating black culture. It is the fucking like music industry writ large, from everything from jazz to rock to fucking like every single type of music is coming from black culture, and all these companies are reaping all the benefit instead of like black community.
Yeah, I think we need to discern the difference between appropriation and emulation, because appropriation is to try to divorce from its context, whereas to emulate is to try to reproduce in a way that it was not intended to originally be done. Like you sometimes find it like we'll use the example of kind of like rap at Eminem, where there could be an argument where like him individually was trying to emulate that style. Now whether he did it successfully, I have no idea at all. But I think just to add that nuance in there, where that it's, if you're trying to preserve the context and understanding the struggles attached to those individual ideas, there might not really be an issue involved there, because like here's the thing about culture that I think what worries me about the cultural appropriation argument sometimes is because it veers into the right-wing thinking of that cultures are uniquely tied to ethnicities, when culture has always spread through trade and just interaction. When you meet somebody from a different culture, you're going to have a cultural exchange going on there. So I get worried about the liberal obsession with cultural appropriation sometimes, because it kind of feels like it's like that culture belongs to those people, uniquely, exclusively to those people, completely forgetting that you live in a multicultural society. There is going to be bleeding over, and a new culture will emerge from that. And like, to me, that's beautiful. And I'm worried about kind of like the hierarchical kind of like the what James Connolly called the crystallization of history into a kind of being like a chauvinistic shell of itself to self-serve its own purposes rather than to actually celebrate the idea itself.
Okay, two completely trivial points. First of all, it's not all music. Classical music was like historically very white. Okay,
no
so
one makes any fucking money off classical music. The American music industry
they just resell the same music
zero
in,
money
in
off of
compilation
that shit.
CDs. Yeah.
So
every
your
metal
point's
album
actually
just
bad.
rips a symphony off.
And secondly, like if you're gonna go after people for like wearing certain kinds of hair and stuff, I feel like, not to get like slippery slope, but it's pretty hard to even justify like eating Chinese food or like any of the other hundreds of different like cultural things you engage in. So like, I mean, at that point, if you're gonna say like, oh, you can only do things from your own culture, I mean, we might as well just live in ethno states at that point. Like,
and
just listen to classical music and eat pizza or whatever, you know.
Well, what's
really that was hyperbole. I didn't actually mean that. Okay.
What's really interesting is like what we call Chinese food is actually like fusion, like American Chinese food, and what we call pizza is actually a fusion American pizza, right? Like these are actually multicultural dishes that we're consuming, and lots of culture that we consume is multicultural culture itself. Like I forget the specifics, but there was some big kerfuffle about people, like a white person wearing a dress from X country and how this was cultural appropriation, but that style dress came from a different country than that one originally, because the world is multicultural.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe Chinese food isn't the best example, but I think you kind of get like where I'm coming from.
Sorry for Dr. K, because Dr. K Scott. Go ahead, Dr. K, and then Zanzi.
So when you're talking about a situation like this, I think it's important that we sort of frame it around, if a situation or a behavior is going to be bad or good, frame it around the intent of the person. I would say is the best framing mechanism for something like that. So if someone was intending to be malicious or make a mockery of something, then yeah, obviously that's bad. And if they are intending to respect but do it really, really like ham-fistedly or come off badly, then it's like, don't do that again. But it's like, it's not like they were trying to hurt anyone. You know, that's my take on it, at least.
Wait, okay. Jack Saint just made a throwaway joke in chat saying, "I don't think white people are valid." I assume that was a joke, Jack, right?
No, I
Because-
actually
All right, bring out the
fundamentally-
cancel culture.
No. Because I was
Here we
about to
go.
say, I unironically believe that. I actually don't think white identity is valid because I'm anti like race theory. I'm a deconstructionalist, and like I personally do the best I can not to identify as white and try to distance myself from that colonial concept as it exists.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, race
that's
is
a much
a-
smarter perspective. I was just saying that because someone in chat was saying no one's been cancelled yet. So I just wanted to say
the thing for me that I find frustrating is like is the way that sometimes the way that American people will put their own lens and analysis of race into Europe, because in Europe, you know, I'm white, quote unquote, in a different way than like a Polish person is white, because a Polish person will receive like discrimination over here that I won't because I'm like native born or whatever, right? And but then like obviously if we both went to America, it would be a different story, right? But then it's like we're not in America, so it gets a bit complicated, you know. And you get situations where like content creators that are like Bosnian are called crackers, and they obviously are like, what the fuck? Like, how dare you call me a cracker? I live in a country where I am oppressed to a degree because of my ethnicity, and you're calling me a cracker. Like, that's really offensive. And then obviously like Americans don't understand, and it gets very do you know what I mean? And
I saw Americans making fun of jelly deals, and jelly deals is a traditional Cockney working class dish that we had to eat, so it's classist, is what they're doing. Making fun of British food is classist.
That's true.
Yeah, there's a difference between you know, ethnic and race relations in post-colonial and the imperial core states. Yes, that's completely valid.
Yeah,
That's a really good way to
transatlantic slave trade changed everything. But before the association of race with phenotype, race within Europe tended to refer to language and then to kind of nationality. Like I'm an Irish Republican leftist. The entire history of our struggle was based off of a form of national racism that existed, but it's incomparable with racism you see in the United States, where it's like, to excuse the pun, but it ended up being very black and white in the United States because it was such an extreme form of very obvious racism based off of you are white or you aren't white. It ended up being so much more complicated in Europe, to the point where like the Nazis actively held a hierarchy based on like degrees of whiteness, where they had like the pure Aryan Nordic people, and then there was kind of like the Saxons who were allowed in. Then there was kind of like the what are they called, the southern Mediterranean peoples. Then there was the Slavs, and then there was the Jews. Like they tiered that aspect of what most people would just call quote unquote white. I'm personally of the opinion that like white, like the concept of whiteness within race is to be acultural. It's to try to strip yourself of a lot of your cultural affects so as to appropriate to appropriate other indigenous cultures for the intention of commodifying them for capitalism. It's why we say like that white nationalism and capitalism are inseparable, because like to be a good capitalist you need to totally dehumanize yourself to the point where like being white, like even look into like the connotations associated with the idea of whiteness, it's kind of like that purity, blank slates, the idea that you're just a disposable cog. Like to be white is to rid yourself of all of the things that uniquely tie you to being some breed of indigenous person, which is why like one of the perspectives that I love in terms of like what a person of color is a person of color is a non-white person, which identifies this dichotomy between white nationalism seeks to otherize everyone else so as to preserve white nationalism, and through it capitalism. So yeah, when Jack said whiteness isn't valid, I totally agree. We need to deconstruct it.
Yeah, whiteness is the absence of color, right? It's the absence of any of the foreign kind of
No, that technically it's black within optics. White is the combination of all colors.
No, I mean in the racial sense though, not in yeah.
Okay, listen, we're so far off the beaten track. What I want to do, we're going to start to wrap things up. But first of all, Dr. K, you know, final point from you, and then I'll give everyone a chance to outro. So, Dr. K, go ahead.
Well, keep in mind, right, when this was right, is that you have the sort of Anglo ruling class that sort of, you know, was part of the founding cultural group of the United States, right? The one that's been basically at the hegemonic top the entire time, right? And the issue is as you know, they didn't have the manpower force needed to maintain an enormous country like that on their own that they were trying to create. So they were sort of forced their hand to say, all right, fine, you other European types, you can come on in. And there was a sort of push over time to say join this American culture instead of, whatever you were before, that was sort of a big stipulation. It was even like an unwritten criteria of coming through Ellis Island is that you had okay with erasing your old culture and coming in with this new American blob culture. It was even a practice, right, that when someone came in, if they had a foreign sounding name, you would anglicize it, right? You would make it part of this American blob culture. And so honestly, I wouldn't say, I would say, don't try to distance yourself from the concept. Well, obviously try and distance yourself from the colonial concept of whiteness, but instead I recommend, a look back into your own roots and getting back in contact with what was lost.
Okay, brilliant. So we'll do outros now. Just for anyone watching, after I've done outros, I'm going to quickly chat to chat, and I'm going to put mild pressure on everyone to give me money, so you can look forward to that. But before we get to that, Dr. K, do you want to just give your outro? I mean, any final thoughts, and then give yourself an outro where we can find your stuff? Oh. Okay, we'll come back to Dr. K. Noopy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the stream. I'm Noopy, aka Noopy Toons. You can Google my name, Noopy Toons, to find my political comics, etc. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Dr. K, if you could just give yourself any final thoughts and an outro.
Yeah, be good to each other, I suppose. Shout out to the enslaved firemen who are trying to save my state right now. On top of that, right now I'm working on a video on how to create a state for your tabletop RPG campaigns, and I'm planning to have that out Wednesday or Thursday, so that'll be kind of neat. So I'll be on my YouTube page that I rarely upload to. So yeah, check that out. Check out my Twitch, the Twitter, and the Discord, especially if you want to bother me.
Okay, Zanzi.
Hey, I'm Zanzi. I'm an Irish Republican Socialist. I'm deeply sorry for the quality of my internet and the choppy mic earlier. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's really fun because I wanted to get the nuance of unpacking what's beneath the term rather than fixating and focusing on the term itself. Very quickly, I just want to point out that the right wing is deeply involved in political correctness. Every time they raise a Christian family to basically say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, that's political correctness. They're fucking horrible people. You can catch me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at Zanzi. Just Google it, I'll pop up. Thanks very much.
Good stuff. Jack?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I humbly accept my victory in this debate. Chud, thank you for no longer dodging the debate as you've been doing with me for some time now. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a really fun conversation. I've appreciated talking to everybody. I'm Jack Saint. You can find me on YouTube.
Okay, cool. And Catherine?
Yeah, just to very quickly address like what Dr. K was saying, I'm not going to connect with my old like ethnic roots, tracing back my history, just because my culture is like queer culture, pagan culture, witchy culture, like the culture of the oppressed in America is enough for me to sort of identify with. And I'll probably float the idea of identifying as like ethnically queer and see how that works out. Yeah, you could come find me at Catherine Dominates at twitch.tv. I technically have a YouTube channel. It has one crappy desynced audio video on it, but it's Catherine Dominates here on YouTube if you want to follow me there. I'm going to start putting more content on there. And at Cat dominates on Twitter. If you want to get my good takes, I jump on lots of panels. Sometimes I stream drawing.
Okay, cool. Sorry, Dr. K, do you have another thought?
Wait, Chud, this was a debate? I thought this was a circle jerk.
Well,
Oh,
at the
I made a
start,
mistake.
It was
Whoops.
clearly a debate. I got Peter Coffin to say that they're a race realist. Come on, I won this debate.
That's
I
not
was
what
not there
happened,
for
and you
that.
know it. Okay.
okay, look, let's just okay. Look, listen. Thanks for coming on, everyone. I appreciate it. Okay, thanks for spending 3 hours with me. And thanks to Peter Coffin too. Yeah, I'm going to drop out the call now. You know, if you want to stay and chat, or you want to go, whatever you want to do. Good luck to you. Okay.
All right.
Bye,
See you,
bye.
Chud. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Right.